The earlier accident had let Harry spot the golden snitch, and he dove after it at once. Slytherin's seeker tried to follow, but his broom was no match for Harry's, and he was left behind. The snitch plunged low, and Harry dropped with it, skimming the ground, so close he might have brushed the turf. Slytherin's seeker had to pull up. He wouldn't risk following so low. Harry! Amid a roar of voices, Harry slammed to the ground, one hand clutching his stomach. A small golden ball bounced from his mouth. "I caught the snitch," he shouted, lifting it high. The whole stadium exploded in cheers, everywhere but Slytherin. "Harry! It's Harry!" Lee Chowdon leapt to his feet, grinning. "Our seeker, Harry Potter, the youngest seeker in a century. He caught the snitch. He ended the game on his first match, and the score is—" Lee Chowdon drew the moment out, then shouted with the rest of the commentators and crowd, 170-60, Gryffindor wins. The cheer rolled across the stands. Professor McGonagall hurried down from the visitor's box to congratulate Harry. The Slytherins retreated in sullen silence. Some swore, some slunk away. Marcus, however, wouldn't give up. He was storming toward Madame Hooch. "Harry didn't really catch the snitch," he complained to her. "He fouled. He swallowed the snitch. He cheated." Madame Hooch shot him an irritated look. "If that's a foul, then what were you doing out there?" Lee Chowdon kept celebrating. "We won. Dirty Slytherin couldn't beat us even with their dirty tricks," he crowed, and a few Slytherins would have liked to tear his voice from his throat. "Damn you, Lee Chowdon," Malfoy barked, anger and humiliation making him look ridiculous. "Empty words only make you sound like a barking Welsh corgi," Rogge taunted, calmly. His remark made Malfoy flush. "What do you mean by that, Rogge?" Malfoy snapped. "Want to fight? Go on, then." Rogge nodded toward Lee Chowdon as he walked down from the stands. There were still plenty of professors around. "What? You'd hit someone in front of a professor?" Malfoy sneered, trying to force bravado. "If you're frightened, just say so. You'll get expelled at worst." Rogge shrugged. "Hogwarts isn't the only school of magic in Europe," he seemed to say with his expression. Malfoy hesitated then, with Daphne hissing in his ear. He followed after Rogge. Goyle and Crabbe exchanged worried looks. "You can't hit someone in front of the professors," one whispered. "I don't believe Rogge would actually do it," Malfoy muttered, and then Rogge really did approach Lee Chowdon. "Harry, you were amazing today," Ron said to Harry, still breathless as he described the match, pointing out Marcus still arguing with Madame Hooch. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" he added with a frown. Rogge extended his hand to Harry with a polite smile. "Mr. Potter, you're as good at Quidditch as your father." "Thank you." Harry accepted the handshake, recognizing no malice in Rogge's face. Rogge turned to Lee Chowdon. "Lee Chowdon?" "That's me," Lee Chowdon answered smugly. "If you don't like my commentary, you should think about why people cheer for us." "You appear to have a healthy sense of self-awareness," Rogge said, then suddenly stepped forward and punched Lee Chowdon hard in the face. Before anyone could react, Lee Chowdon hit the ground. Rogge didn't stop. He kept hitting him, fists driving into Jordan's face, until Lee Chowdon was a curled, whimpering heap. "Stop!" Angelina rushed forward, but Daphne pointed her wand at her, ready to back her friend. Goyle's voice trembled. "Malfoy, shall we go?" "Humph. Stop them. Rogge and I will accept responsibility if anything happens," Malfoy cried, brandishing his wand and stepping between Rogge and the beaten boy. He planted himself in front of Harry, as if to protect him. Professor McGonagall's face went white. She ran through the crowd. "Rogge, stop this at once!" Rogge straightened slowly, folding his hands as though nothing untoward had occurred. Angelina crouched to help Lee Chowdon up. His nose was crooked and his face was bloody. "Jordan, Lee Chowdon, are you all right?" she asked, voice full of alarm. "Rogge, why are you assaulting a fellow student?" McGonagall demanded, stern and bewildered. Several other professors pressed forward, their expressions shocked. Rogge spoke calmly, taking a white handkerchief and wiping his fists. "A light warning. I only hit him lightly. He's not even bruised." What happened?" McGonagall's eyes flashed with anger. "Striking another student was a serious offense. You should ask him," Rogge said coolly, fixing a stern look on Lee Chowdon. The third year was too frightened to speak. "You may dislike Slytherin's style," Rogge said, his voice low and controlled. "You may accuse us of unscrupulousness or ambition. Fine. But there is a difference between criticizing and insulting." He took another step forward. You called us dirty Slytherin, didn't you? McGonagall's frown deepened. She had cautioned Jordan during the match to mind his words. She had certainly not expected him to spout such insults the moment he left the pitch. Nobility, true nobility, has dignity. Baseness has its own name, Rogge went on, addressing students and professors alike. You can criticize Slytherin's tactics or accuse us of ruthlessness, but for a wizard to call another dirty, that is the worst of insults. You who have opposed slurs like mudblood in the past seem all too ready to use a similar slur against us, he continued, mocking. The room fell silent. If this were the Middle Ages, I would have thrown down a gauntlet. Of course, if anyone wants a duel, step forward. He added with a curt, almost playful smile, given I'm only a third year, I'll go easy on you. He then tossed the blood-stained handkerchief to the ground and walked away. No one stopped him. No punishment came. By dinner, the story had spread across the castle. Rogge Travis had hit a fellow student in front of several professors and walked away unpunished. At the Slytherin table, they raised their goblets to him. His fist had seemed to erase the sting of today's Quidditch defeat. If it weren't for Madame Hooch's favoritism, Marcus muttered at the table, still grasping at what might have been. Favoritism? Rogge raised an eyebrow. Or clever interpretation of the rules. Marcus flushed but nodded, sheepish. The first years in Slytherin idolized Rogge. His calm authority, the way he kept his word and reasoned through things, made him a model to them. The Slytherin table ate in polite silence, sitting straighter than usual. Many students from other houses glanced over in surprise. Hadn't they just lost at Quidditch? Lee Chiaodun's face was bandaged. His eyes were swollen nearly shut. If it hadn't been for Madame Pomfrey's skill, his nose might not have been reattached so neatly. Who did it? Madame Pomfrey demanded, pulling a potion from a cupboard and forcing Jordan to drink it. It was Rogge from Slytherin, Rogge Travis, Ron swore under his breath in the hospital bed. Ron, it wasn't entirely Rogge's fault, Hermione said, trying to calm things down. Ron's face hardened. Not his fault. He's the one who hit Jordan, gave him those injuries. But Jordan insulted Slytherin first. Humph, what insult? Dirty Slytherin. Everyone knows that's what he meant. Ron sneered. Jordan just said it out loud. He couldn't stand us winning, so he took his chance to get revenge. Harry, what do you say? Hermione, Ron's right. Harry nodded. It was clearly planned. Even if Jordan's words were too much, there was no reason to hit him that hard. Hermione stamped her foot, furious, and stormed out of the hospital wing. After that, nobody at school spoke about Rogge beating a classmate as if it had never happened. People either deliberately or conveniently ignored it. On Monday after potions, Rogge handed in his assignment. After his recent friendly exchange with Snape, he only had to produce 5 bottles at a time. Snape glanced at the potion, replaced it in the cabinet, and gave Rogge a dry look. Professor, aren't you going to say something? Rogge asked, limping slightly. His right leg was still injured. Say something? Snape raised an eyebrow. Do you want me to praise you? If you can beat Gryffindor on the Quidditch pitch, that'd be more convincing than your fists, Rogge shot back. Snape could not understand the boy's attitude toward Quidditch. Don't forget you're a wizard, he said exasperatedly. Not a boxer wizard. A broom's only good on the pitch, Rogge said simply. My fists are useful everywhere. Snape just watched him with a look of disbelief. As Christmas drew near, owls arrived almost daily. Andrew, the asset manager, pestered Jessica with letters. People in the financial city were constantly asking him to invest. Invest? They're just unwilling to lose, Rogge said, tossing Andrew's letter aside. Jessica had bought a shop in Diagon Alley to sell magic instant cameras. It sat diagonally opposite Gringotts, with Nocturne Alley just a left turn away, a prime spot. 2,000 cameras were ready. All that remained was the Christmas opening. Rogge, are you going home for Christmas? Daphne asked, propping a history of magic book open. She hated memorizing dates. Sort of, Rogge said. Shadow Apparition House will be open over Christmas. I need to go back and prepare. Don't worry, your present's ready. Outside, Hagrid carried a fir tree in while Harry and Ron helped. Daphne's face lit up. Really? Give it to me now. No, Rogge shook his head. A Christmas present only means something on the day. Humph. Same every year. Daphne swirled her juice and watched the Great Hall. McGonagall and Flitwick were already decorating. Hagrid had set the tree against the wall, and every surface was draped with holly and mistletoe. Dozens of Christmas trees, each differently adorned, filled the hall. Professor Flitwick waved his wand, and hundreds of candles flickered into the tree by him. "Strange," Daphne said, leaning her head on her hand. "Those two have actually started going to the library to study lately." She meant Harry and Ron. Daphne had stopped caring much about Harry Potter's savior reputation. She hadn't spent much time with him recently, and she honestly thought he wasn't that impressive. He wasn't nearly as diligent as Hermione. Apart from being good at Quidditch, both Harry and Ron seemed hopeless in other subjects. "Hermione always says they borrow homework to copy," Daphne continued. "Now they study in the library. Either they're changing, or someone's put Imperio on them." "People do change," Rogge said, putting Alexander's letter away. He glanced toward the window. The Muggle government in the Soviet Union was in chaos, on its last legs it seemed, while the Soviet Ministry of Magic was still more orderly. "Unbreakable Union," he muttered. It was an ironic tune. Orthodox Christmas was on January 7th, but the world had received an unprecedented Christmas present on December 25th. At King's Cross Station, Jessica waited on the platform until she saw her son. She ran to him and wrapped him in a big hug. "Taller and stronger," she said, pinching his cheek and marking his height with her hand, nodding with pride. "Quidditch?" she asked in the car, regretting that her son didn't like the sport. "Too dangerous, flying that high." Rogge refused firmly. If there hadn't been flying exams, he wouldn't have even taken the class. "When I was at school, I always wanted to join Quidditch," Jessica sighed. "I wasn't even on Hufflepuff's candidates. I thought you'd like it." Their villa by the Thames had been decked out in Christmas finery. A tall tree stood in the living room, woven with colorful ribbons. Jessica bustled about, preparing food for the owls. She was sure Rogge would receive a stack of presents. The living room was piled with gifts, and Rogge busied himself making cards. Even with enchanted quills doing the writing, he still had to think carefully about each gift. Soon, a neat stack of cards sat on the table. Rogge's first present was for his mother, a small album of enchanted photographs of himself at Hogwarts. He bound them with a little boast. He was getting handsomer all the time. "Bubble, go to Andrew's and get the pocket watch I bought," Rogge instructed. "Okay, little master." Bubble was quick. The house elf returned in a few breaths with a flat gift box. Inside lay a Patek Philippe enamel pocket watch, the case painted with tiny, exquisite landscape enamel work, the scene vivid and meticulous. The off-white dial and the elegant in-house movement made it a tasteful, timeless gift. Rogge tucked Daphne's card inside, and the ribbon tied itself into a neat bow. Choosing Hermione's present had been hardest. She was the academic type and read constantly. Rogge didn't want to give her textbooks or notes, yet after thinking it through, those were the things that would genuinely please her. He also toyed with the idea of a defensive charm for her. After all, Hermione had lived through more than a few dangerous adventures. In the end, he gave Ileana a handmade magic instant camera, Snape an enchanted cloak, and Professor McGonagall a crystal cat sculpture. He worked through the morning until the last box was closed, then entrusted them to owls for delivery. He sent holiday greetings to almost everyone he knew. Even Mr. Paul in Wales received a parcel. As for those he didn't know well, even the famous Harry Potter didn't appear on the list this year. "Is this my Christmas present?" Jessica noticed a wide, flat box still on the table. "Won't tell you," Rogge called cheerfully from upstairs. The fire in the fireplace crackled. The grandfather clock's hands inched forward. Christmas of 1991 arrived quietly, just like that. Chapter 63, Snape's Gift. What is a home but a place where you can sleep in peace? Rogge lay comfortably in his bed and let himself drift off. It might not be as secure as Hogwarts, but it felt far more reassuring. Outside the window, large snowflakes drifted down. Yumi, who had just come in from playing, shook the snow from her fur and leapt onto him. She padded around the bed, found the most comfortable spot, curled into a ball, and purred contentedly. Early the next morning, Rogge ran into the living room. The Christmas tree sagged under the weight of presents, and owls landed on the windowsill from time to time with more deliveries. "Merry Christmas, Mum," he said. "You too, child." Jessica smiled and handed him a beautifully wrapped box. "Open it now." Rogge carefully peeled back the paper. Inside was a thick book of magic and a family heirloom pinky ring. Mom, I love it! He flipped the book open. It was written in runes. It's in runes and contains many old spells. The ring is the Travis family crest. I hoped you'd like them, Jessica said softly. Of course. Rogge beamed and handed over the gift he had for her. Jessica unwrapped it with eager fingers to find a heavy photo album embossed in gold, Rogge, Travis, and Hogwarts. She settled on the sofa and began to flip through it, eyes lighting up at each picture. She had Bubble bring together all the photos Rogge had sent and arranged them into the album. Rogge leaned against her, narrating his life at school, the Slytherin common room, the little elf kitchen he'd discovered. It's opposite Hufflepuff. I used to go there a lot at school, and the run-in with a troll. Jessica scolded him for his recklessness, but she was also quietly proud that he'd killed the troll. After she finished looking through the album, she told him to open the gifts from his friends. Oh, Elvin sent one, Rogge said, picking up a small box on top of the pile. It turned out to be a junk shop discount card, 80% off, and a scroll of parchment. Rogge pouted. The old wizard had been stingy as ever and even used Christmas to advertise. Still, it was a kind gesture. I'll still shop at your place next time, Rogge said, half amused. Next came Snape's gift. Rogge unwrapped a potion he'd never seen before. It shone with a dense, powerful magic. Daphne's gift was a black crystal pendant, clearly an artifact pulled from some ancient ruin, presumably found with Mercus in an underwater site. Hermione had sent a scarf, a fine weave of silver, white, and green forming a diamond pattern. One present after another came from Slytherin classmates. Even Malfoy had sent something, the House of Malfoy crest on the wrapping, reminding Rogge of the old alliance Lucius had once mentioned. Nothing more had come of that, so perhaps it had been forgotten. Rogge held the potion up to the light. It shimmered like liquid gold. He searched the inside of the box and found a line of writing, Phoenix Tear. He frowned. Could the main ingredient really be the tear of a phoenix, like Fawkes? Phoenix Tear was legendary for its healing power, able to cure both magical and mundane injuries. Anything paired with it would have to be equally rare, likely on par with unicorn-grade ingredients. If so, the bottle was immensely valuable. He twisted off the cap. A sweet floral scent rose, night-blooming primrose with a hint of waterweed. Rogge's heart thudded with nervous curiosity. He steadied himself, shook the vial gently, took a breath, and drank it in one gulp. The flavor hit his tongue like molten gold, bitter and sharp, threaded with the mellow sweetness of primrose. Almost instantly, a gentle warmth spread through him, like a spring sun unfurling over the skin. A deep calm rose from his chest, an absolute, settling peace in which anxiety, fear, and stress simply melted away. Energy surged through him, roaring like a newly awakened volcano and flooding his limbs to his fingertips. It felt as if golden lightning had touched him. A faint golden glow shimmered under his skin. He breathed and felt reborn, his body and mind saturated with renewed vigor. His stamina and magical capacity felt heightened, as if he had risen like a phoenix from ashes. The subdued starlight that had accumulated in him was reactivated. Both his magic and his physique seemed to have nearly doubled. Rogge checked himself inwardly, surprised to find the new balance confirmed by his sense of power. Rogge Travis magic, 50-50. Mental strength, 25 talents. Dark affinity, strong will, night vision skills. Wandless casting, silent casting, dark arts, advanced potion mastery spells, sectum sempra level of 3, disillusionment charm level of 2, expecto patronum level of 2, potions, merperson potion, blue moonlight, magic energy reserve potion. 2-1, my magic is finally normal, he exhaled slowly. The ruin left by 11 years in Azkaban vanished in that moment. He stared at the empty bottle, speechless. This was Snape's Christmas gift, Phoenix Tear, a healing elixir like a phoenix's nirvana. Gratitude to his professor swelled in him. No amount of blue moonlight or tranquil starlight had been a permanent fix. The harm Azkaban did would only become more obvious with age. His magic might stop growing at some point, and without sufficient power, even extraordinary talent would be wasted, like water without a source or a tree without roots. In duels, he could only rely on overwhelming speed, always with the sword of Damocles hanging over him, ready to fall once his reserves ran out. But Phoenix Tear changed that calculus. Perhaps all of the future struggles had been eased. "Thank you, teacher," Rogge murmured, reverent, and tucked the empty vial away. "We should head to the shop now." Jessica picked up a brown leather bag and a magical instant camera, while Bubble trailed behind carrying a large box. Jessica snapped a few quick photos when Rogge wasn't looking. "It's so handy, instant pictures," she said, smiling as she examined the developing sheets. Rogge peered at the black and white images and frowned slightly. "Black and white photos are missing something. I'll keep working on it. Next time I can manage a color version," he promised. "Good boy, don't overwork yourself." Jessica's face shone with pride. She imagined the shadow apparition house opening and the camera in her hand bringing surprises to the wizarding world. Diagon Alley was buried in a thick blanket of white. Shop doorways were trimmed with sparkling reindeer antlers and strings of colored lights. Behind shop windows, Christmas trees were dressed in ornaments, and confectionery displays featured gummy figures that performed comical little routines to delight passers-by. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and mulled wine. Wizards in Santa suits hawked holiday treats and gifts on the bustling street. Chapter 64, Flash Golem House. When Shadow Apparition House was first taken over, like many of the neighboring shops, it had been added onto and leaned at odd angles. In his letter, Roger had insisted it be repaired straight and tidy. Now, pushing open the door, he found a quaint, elegant two-story shop where a crooked facade had once stood. Dark red brick gave the walls a warm look, while pale yellow floral patterns trimmed the corners and windowsills. A large glass display case was set into the wall facing Gringotts, still shrouded in cloth, waiting to be filled. Above the oak door, an arched lintel held a shimmering sign carved with the name Shadow Apparition House, flanked by pairs of owls. Above the sign, a stylized lightning bolt caught every passerby's eye, a deliberate nod to the shop's specialty in lightning-powered instant cameras. Roger had taken care to design the bolt so it certainly did not point the same way as Harry Potter's scar. Inside, the shop was bright and spacious. An open activity area filled the center, with tall shelving lining both sides. On the left, the camera section was most prominent. 5 or 6 wooden shelves, each neat and orderly, displayed magical instant cameras in black, silver, and coffee brown. They were small, tasteful, and each bore a red circular label engraved with a golden lightning bolt. The right side held photography supplies, black and white apparition paper with cute panda prints on the top shelf, shadow apparition developing fluid lined up below. Various lenses sat at the back in elegant cases, available to be taken out for testing. At Jessica's request, they'd bolstered the shop's security with charms. Alarm charms, anti-theft charms, anti-apparition charms, so that the place felt almost as secure as Gringotts across the street. "The renovation looks wonderful," Jessica said approvingly. Roger liked the bright, tidy space. "Of course, I put a lot of thought into it. Diana even came to help for the opening." From her perch, Diana chirped at once. "Madam Jessica, Merry Christmas. Oh, what a cute little wizard." Sophie, emerging from the storeroom, hurried over. "Hello, I'm Sophie, the shop assistant." Her golden hair fell in soft curls and her blue eyes were lively. In the shop uniform, she looked cheerful and efficient. "Madam Jessica said you're a real magic genius." "Ha, that's an exaggeration. I'm just a bit diligent," Roger said with a smile. Jessica's assistant was enthusiastic to a fault. "Quick, Sophie, take Roger to the bouncing and laughing magic shop and get fireworks. We must be ready by 2 o'clock. Move." Jessica snapped into work mode, decisive and brisk. "Right away, Madam Jessica." Sophie's face lit up. She grabbed her coat and pulled Roger along. "Roger, Mr. Jerry Jiggle's joke shop has everything. Puking pastilles, fake wands, magical fireworks." Sophie practically dragged him through the crowd into the joke shop she'd adored in school. "We're going to get fireworks," Roger reminded her. "What if we're late coming back?" "Don't worry," she said with a mischievous grin. "Have you never been to a joke shop? If you're good, I'll buy you a toy. Don't tell Madam Jessica." Sophie's parents were Muggle actors, and money had been tight while she was at school. Now, with a job, she could finally buy herself things. They squeezed through the doorway together, Sophie urging Roger to pick whatever he liked. But she disappeared into the aisles almost immediately, leaving Roger to hunt down the owner. "Hello, Mr. Jerry. Do you have fireworks?" Roger asked. "Fireworks? Jerry peered at him. You mean the magical kind that bloom in water? Over there. It was Christmas, and the shop was full of little wizards spending their pocket money on pranks. Bloom in water? Roger blinked. Don't you have ordinary fireworks? Ordinary? Jerry tutted. Child, this is a joke shop. He frowned as if ordinary fireworks were an odd request. Muggle ones? When Roger suggested going to a Muggle market, Jerry almost scoffed. Muggle fireworks can't compare with mine. What do you need fireworks for? Jerry asked. For the shop opening. You should have said so sooner. With a flourish of his wand, he took down a handful of the magical fireworks. These only need a little water to ignite, perfect for what you need. Water? Roger still looked uncertain. Don't believe me? Watch. Jerry flicked his wand and cast aguamenti. The fireworks were wetted, and with a sharp bang, they erupted into a glorious bloom of light that filled the shop, dazzling the little customers. Jerry beamed. How's that? Roger had to admit the effect was irresistible. All right, give me 10, he said, though inwardly he felt the show was smaller than he'd imagined. Sophie returned less than 5 minutes later, looking downcast. Sold out? Roger asked. No, she muttered. Then why so glum? I just don't find these things funny anymore, she wailed. I used to love them at school. Have I changed? Maybe you're not at school anymore, Roger suggested. Sophie forced a smile and took the fireworks from him. Well, even if I've lost my taste for pranks, you haven't. Go pick a toy, anything you want. He wandered the cluttered aisles and at last picked up a sonorous mouth. A crimson, exaggerated clown mouth, 10 times larger than life. 2 thick, painted lips framed a row of stark white teeth. It acted like a giant megaphone. Whatever was spoken into it was amplified and repeated back exactly, matching tone and timbre. Isn't this just a talking parrot? Roger wondered aloud. Ah? You're just taking this? The sonorous mouth is boring. Sophie protested, and the mouth immediately echoed her complaint, perfectly imitating her voice. All right, at least it can make people furious, Sophie muttered, waving for him to switch it off. Back outside, the shop's curtains had been drawn away, and winter sunlight glinted off the smooth display glass. Susan had set up a small stage at the entrance for the opening raffle. On a gleaming tripod, the prizes sparkled. A complete set of photography lenses valued at 10,000 galleons, a Nimbus 2000 broomstick, an invisibility cloak woven from Demiguy's hair, Lockhart's complete collection with gilded spines catching the light, little warm pouches of galleons, and on the lower shelf, an assortment of golden pocket watches and music boxes. Everything in the velvet raffle box was tempting. Anyone who spent more than 10 galleons could draw a numbered ball for a chance to win one of those grand prizes. Chapter 65 Finista. The passing wizard's eyes lit up, and many stopped to watch the unusual lottery display. The sinister types from Nocturne Alley, like sharks sensing blood, mingled in the crowd, greedily eyeing the expensive prizes on the stage. Is this a new shop? Why haven't I seen it before? A middle-aged wizard in a gray robe asked his companion suspiciously. It used to be a magical plant shop, don't you remember? His friend replied. But the place didn't look like this before. Ah, that's right. The previous owner was killed by you-know-who's followers. I didn't expect it to reopen. Shadow Apparition House? Odd name. The middle-aged wizard nodded, his gaze fixed on the stage. They've been renovating since last month, and it's so close to Nocturne Alley. Aren't they afraid of being robbed? Look at those men. Their mouths are practically watering. Don't even mention them. I'm tempted myself. My son's been asking for a Nimbus 2000. Mine too, but a Nimbus 2000 costs 5,000 galleons. It's astronomical. Can we even afford that? Do you think they'll get one? He pointed toward the dark figures in the crowd. Those lot can forget it. I just saw Dolores go inside. Dolores? The Auror from the Ministry of Magic? Yes, the gray-haired one. And there are people from the Greengrass family in there too. This shop dares to open here. They clearly aren't afraid of the Nocturne Alley types. As for us, let's just enjoy the show. The onlookers exchanged snippets of gossip while staring at the prizes, their faces betraying greed. If this had not been Diagon Alley, and if Aurors weren't standing inside the shop, the crowd might have turned ugly long ago. Thompson strolled up, grinning. He'd been doing well at the ministry lately, and had even made friends with a senior Auror. Rogge, Merry Christmas! He pulled the little wizard toward the display window and complained, half to Gringotts, half to his friend. Those goblins have a nose like hounds. We only exchanged 1,000,000 galleons, and they shut the exchange window, closed it permanently. Ruthless. 1,000,000? Rogge was surprised. That was already a large sum. He'd thought the goblins would catch them after just a few 100,000. Those stingy ghouls are hunting down anyone who exploits loopholes. Lucky you had help from Mrs. Edgecombe at the Flu Network office. They won't find us, Thompson said proudly. I also did some exchange on the black market, 3,000,000 galleons in total. Black market dealers all over the world are so generous, so lovely, and so friendly. Thompson flashed a mischievous grin. They're desperate because they've got piles of muggle money they can't exchange. I hope they enjoy their Christmas. On the black market, the rate between galleons and pounds has shot up to 1/500. We'll still split it by the old ratio. I've already given your share to Mrs. Jessica. Thompson, thanks. Be careful. If I were those black market dealers, I'd be tempted to eat you alive. Rogge hadn't expected Thompson to be so efficient. 3,000,000 galleons was a lot. That's why I dragged Dolores along to Diagon Alley. They're the Ministry's favored Auror with a bright future. Thompson shivered at the thought. If any of this leaked out, the Nocturne Alley types would tear him apart. A little girl waved at Rogge, and he pushed him toward her. Rogge, I got your Christmas present. Daphne ran over with her sister Astoria in tow. Do you like it? I do, but my sister stole it. Daphne looked helplessly at Astoria, who beamed her dimples and proudly produced an exquisite pocket watch. Alexander Smog arrived with Ileana. He had a vivid red beard and blue eyes. His hair was thin enough, Rogge thought it might fall off. Merry Christmas. Alexander admired the bright, simple layout of the shop. Nadia, you can look around first. He used Ileana's nickname, then turned to Rogge. Daphne, we'll talk later, sorry. Rogge and Alexander exchanged a look and headed upstairs. Mr. Alexander, how are things at the Soviet Ministry of Magic? Rogge invited Alexander to sit and had Bubble bring tea. Far Eastern oolong, very fitting for the season. A complete mess, Alexander said heavily. The ministry has lost control. Like Grindelwald once did, many officials are being purged. I don't know how you predicted today. Maybe, as Nadia says, you have a seer's touch. Rogge watched Alexander with concern. As a defector from the Soviet ministry, Alexander had led a hard life. You might not know, but for decades many wizards there were tried by the ministry and imprisoned in gulag camps, places as terrifying as Azkaban. Alexander's voice was bitter. Now many have been released and fled to the Eastern European magical world, and their arrivals have caused chaos. His expression was complicated. The Soviet Ministry of Magic is in upheaval. I, a fugitive, can now return openly. The Soviet Muggle government's control over the ministry has ended. The noble wizards of Moscow will rise again. Alexander slammed his fist on the table, bloodless with excitement. But the American Magical Congress is eyeing us greedily. They'll use this opportunity to plunder my former homeland. We are not the Muggle government of Moscow, and I will never allow these ministry rats to sell off the property of noble wizards. Yes, plunder, Rogge agreed. A giant has fallen, and the greedy flies and feral dogs are swarming in. As soon as he said it, Rogge felt a flicker of unease, as if he had cursed himself. Uncle Alexander, let's go to Eastern Europe together. He rose, his tone heavy with conviction. This isn't just business. It's about keeping magic in civilized hands. For the glory of the noble wizards. For the glory of the noble wizards. Alexander clasped Rogge's hand firmly. Bubble, is the money ready? Rogge called to the house elf. Bubble produced a concealment trunk. Little master, 100,000 galleons and 50,000 US dollars, Bubble announced. The gold galleons inside shone so brightly that Rogge had to squint. Dollars, Alexander looked puzzled. What good is Muggle currency? Just in case, Rogge said with a thin smile and didn't elaborate. Bubble's coming with us. Of course, Alexander said. A house elf's magic was invaluable. Jessica, having heard the news, hurried upstairs. She looked at her son with worry. Rogge, are you really going to the Eastern European magical world? It's not as safe as the British magical community. When things were stable, vampires, werewolves, and other dark creatures lurked in the shadows. Now, with Eastern Europe in chaos, they're bound to be out causing trouble. Rogge reached for her hand. Mom, don't worry. Uncle Alexander's with me. We'll only be active in Moscow. Think of it as a vacation. All right, then be careful. Matter. Jessica nodded and instructed Bubble to take good care of him. Mrs. Jessica, I leave Nadia in your charge. After Alexander finished speaking, he strode to the fireplace and tossed flue powder into the flames. Fooper. Rogge waved goodbye to his mother and Ilyana, then grabbed a handful of flue powder and spoke his destination. Green flames leapt up, carrying him toward the outskirts of Moscow, 4,962 miles away. No sooner had he finished the words than an invisible force yanked him backward. His vision blurred as fireplaces, some decked in Christmas ornaments, others old and cramped, squeezed and twisted past. The flue network propelled him along at terrifying speed. Though it transported wizards quickly, the ride was unpleasant. Rogge felt crushed in a narrow, dark tunnel, his ears filled with rushing air and his own heartbeat. His stomach churned. Thump! The fireplace at the snowbound cabin thudded as Alexander and Rogge arrived. Compared to Alexander, who used flue powder often, Rogge was seasick and stumbled out dazed. Rogge, get up! Alexander laughed, invigorated by the cold air. This is Fooper, the hunting lodge I built myself. It's been years since I came back, but it's still the same. He hauled Rogge to his feet and pushed open the wooden door. Fooper? Rogge blinked, shaking his head to clear the dizziness and waving his wand to brush soot from his clothes. Chapter 66. Abstract Coup Plan. Fooper is a mysterious, rare magical creature. You might know it by its other name, Phoenix. Alexander stepped out of the hunting lodge and breathed the cold air. The little house elf Bubble had arrived by apparition and followed closely, carrying 10 large boxes, each specially made and layered with undetectable extension charms. Each box could hold 100,000 books. As agreed, Rogge had provided galleons to help Smaug put the Soviet Ministry of Magic back on track. In return, he was allowed to take some items from the ministry's libraries. Fooper? Rogge pressed. Like our headmaster's pet Phoenix? Exactly. Foopers are covered in fiery red feathers and can breathe fire. They don't truly die, only go through one rebirth after another. Alexander beckoned Rogge to follow. The ministry wasn't far from the lodge. If we're lucky, we might even hear news of one. They walked into Moscow. Unlike Britain, Christmas was not in December here. The streets were desolate and unnervingly quiet. Soldiers, trucks, and tanks patrolled the avenues, underscoring the tension. They turned into a narrow alley and found the Hearthstone Tavern, tucked beneath the shadow of old buildings. A dim cast-iron sign hung under its low roof, hinting at the place's secrets. Inside, a dozen vintage round tables were arranged neatly, braziers on the walls sending out small waves of heat. Compared to the leaky cauldron, it was marginally better, though recent events had left the tavern unusually empty. Behind a soy sauce-colored oak counter, the bald tavern owner scrubbed glasses in a mechanical, listless way. Alexander doffed his hat and called out, "Semyon, long time no see." "Alyosha, you're back!" Semyon vaulted over the counter and practically tackled Alexander, hugging him with fierce enthusiasm and kissing his cheek. Then he remembered and hurried to the door to hang a closed sign. "Alyosha, why did you come back?" His face tightened with worry and astonishment. "Is this young man your nephew? And what about Nadia?" "Cough, cough." Alexander cut him off before Semyon could get carried away. "Hello, uncle. This is Rogge Travis, Mr. Alexander's partner." "Partner?" Semyon gaped at Alexander. Rogge is from a British, pure-blood family. Alexander pulled Semyon to a nearby table and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "I've come back because of the Ministry of Magic." "You want to return to the ministry?" Semyon stared, incredulous. "I disagree. Even in chaos, the ministry is not something you can walk away from." He shook his head. "You were one of the founders of Belobog. The ministry won't simply let you go." "But the Soviet Union has fragmented," Alexander said, pain in his voice. "We can't let the magical world be buried along with the Muggles. Belobog's purpose was to separate the magical community from the Soviet state, not to overthrow it. We won't let our world be plundered because a Muggle empire falls," he went on, slamming his fist against his chest. "I want to return the magical world to its former state, to restore the glory of the noble wizards." His gaze was intense. He needed his brother at his side. "What are you planning to do?" Semyon asked blankly. The brother he hadn't seen in years was plotting something vast. Kill Yuri, Alexander said simply. Set the ministry back on the right course. Restore the wizard's honor. He reached out his hand. Semyon hesitated, not yet taking it. Don't forget our name, Alexander pressed, hand on Semyon's shoulders. Our family manor was razed by muggles, turned into some inexplicable sanatorium. Our kin were exterminated, our people sent to laboratories. Have you forgotten how little Ivan died? The words ignited fury in Semyon's eyes. He returned to the counter and fetched his wand. Come with us to the ministry, Alexander said. We'll go and kill Yuri. In the chaos, you can get what you want. He tossed a map onto the table, detailed with most of the ministry's rooms labeled. Just the three of us? We're acting now? Rogge scratched his head, baffled. How could three people confront the entire ministry? Of course, now, Alexander answered with a confidence that left Rogge speechless. Are Slavic coups always this abstract, he thought. Uncle Alexander, even if you're ready to die, think about the future of the Smog family, Rogge said. If this fails, who will remember Smog? Look at Britain's Gaunt family. Now they're just a footnote in magical history. He tried to coax Alexander into caution. We don't need a mass assault. Do as we agreed. Add a little insurance, mobilize quietly, and recruit others who share your ideals. Also, could you tell me about Belobog? Semyon exhaled and poured 3 glasses of strong liquor. Belobog is the light god, one of our oldest beliefs, he said. Many years ago, Alexander and 6 others founded Belobog to make the Soviet Ministry of Magic independent from the Muggle government. He shook his head. Decades passed, and the ministry's highest official turned out to be a traitor. How ridiculous. Many were dissatisfied, and Belobog grew quickly, Semyon continued through gritted teeth. No one expected a traitor to infiltrate us. He spat the name like a curse. Yuri, suka bliat. Alexander listened to his brother's pain and felt remorse bubble up. He betrayed Belobog, betrayed the wizards, just to be a lapdog for the Soviet state, he said bitterly. It was late October, Semyon went on. The wizards of Belobog were meeting in the Arctic Circle. He betrayed our location, and the Muggles dropped a bomb. Alexander choked down the words and emptied a bottle of vodka in a single gulp. They called it a hydrogen bomb. My son and my nephew were there. That day, I should have been the one to die. His eyes were bloodshot. Tears ran down his face. After that, everyone either fled the Soviet Union or was thrown into the Gulag. Rogge nodded, understanding at last. No wonder Ilyana had come to Hogwarts to study. Bubble. Rogge called the elf and took one of the boxes from its hands. Uncle Alexander, a few galleons can make neutral wizards put their wands away, right? He dumped a small mountain of gold coins onto the table. The bright clink echoed in the dim tavern. Rogge, Alexander began, torn. This isn't a gift, Rogge said quickly. Consider it an advance for acquiring books from the ministry library. He handed a box back to Bubble, who cast a disillusionment charm and melted into the shadows nearby. If more wizards are brought into your cause, I don't think this deposit will be wasted. The braziers licked at the cold air, throwing red light over the pile of galleons until they gleamed like embers. Chapter 67, Moscow Night. Alyosha, we can't just charge in, Semyon said, taking his brother's hand and holding him back. He'd lived under the Ministry of Magic's watchful eye for years and had learned to be cautious. Thinking of his newborn son, he hoped his brother would think things through. All right, I'll contact the other wizards. I just hope they don't sell me out to the Ministry of Magic. Semyon laughed. Sell you out to the Ministry? The Ministry of Magic doesn't even know who to sell themselves to. Rogue, would you like some borscht? Semyon asked. Of course, Rogue replied with a smile. He was curious about Moscow and pressed Semyon about the Muggles' living conditions. It's terrible, Semyon shook his head. The Muggles are going through a brutal economic reform. I don't know the details, but they're so poor now, they can't even afford bread. We used to queue, but at least we didn't starve, he complained. Rogue, why are you so interested in the Muggles? Just trying to understand the situation, Rogue said, smiling, and steered the conversation toward the libraries. Uncle Semyon, do you know where the biggest library is? The largest is in St. Petersburg, Semyon considered. But Moscow's is just as good, Vozdvizhenka Street, number 3. I heard from some Muggles at a bar that their government can't even pay wages. I don't think the library will stay open much longer. Does the Hearthstone Tavern still serve muggles? Rogue asked. There's no other way. If we only served wizards, the tavern wouldn't survive, Semyon said, shaking his head. It's a shame. Muggles are struggling so badly. Forget wine. They barely have potatoes. There are always people who can afford red wine, and people who can afford caviar, Rogue observed with a slight smile. They were the ones still eating and drinking that night. Moscow was quiet. The Muggle patrols only stood watch at a few alleyways. In the second half of the night, Alyosha returned, having borrowed all the remaining galleons. Semyon went with him, saying he was going to meet an underground wizard organization. Bored, Rogue cast a disillusionment charm over himself and wandered Moscow with Bubble. At the Kremlin, the red flag that had once flown had been taken down and replaced by a tricolor. Its original meaning didn't matter anymore. The colors had taken on new connotations: white for a return to czarist politics, blue for democracy and freedom, and red relegated to the bottom. Moscow wanted the Soviet sphere of influence, but not its ideals. Rogue shrugged. People chose their own path and had to bear it, even if it meant walking on their knees. The Lenin Library stood in central Moscow, not far from Red Square and the State Historical Museum. Built heavily of stone, its portico was supported by square stone columns with hammer and sickle reliefs at the capitals, symbols that no one cared about any longer. Walking through the ornate arched entrance, Rogue passed stone walls carved with bas-reliefs. Alohomora, he murmured, and the main door clicked open. Inside the silent library, an elderly administrator slept, unaware anyone was there. Rogue moved down the aisles in the pale moonlight. The towering stacks rose like primeval trees, a neatly ordered forest of books, nearly 30 million volumes, manuscripts and documents, including some precious Chinese classics. Rogue laughed softly. Barbarians had stolen the classics of others to paint a veneer of civilization over themselves. If bandits could steal, so could he. He was a barbarian too. Unfortunately, his small, undetectable extension charm was too limited. The books he could take were just a drop in the ocean compared to the library's holdings. Come on, Bubble. We'll rent a big warehouse, at least big enough to hold what we can carry, he told the creature at his side. The warehouse in the suburbs was empty, not even a mouse. The administrator was ecstatic when he learned someone would rent it for dollars. The ruble's value changed by the day. Money that bought bread yesterday might only buy potatoes today. Rogue paid $500 for a year's use of the place. Are you robbing me? Rogue joked to himself as he scanned the shadows, but then he saw 4 young men in Adidas tracksuits following him. Moscow was unstable, and a well-dressed little wizard made a tempting target for local thugs. They loitered behind him, acting casual like jackals. It was late and cold in the suburbs. Rogue couldn't help smirking at their clumsy act. One of them kept his hand deep in his tracksuit pocket, the bulge of a weapon evident. I just arrived in Moscow and ran into thugs. Am I unlucky, or are you? Rogue thought, and with a lazy flick of his wand, he vanished from their sight. Suka Bliat, where did he go? One hissed. Find him quick. That kid has a lot of money. Vanya told me he gave him several dollars. They fanned out, frantic, but couldn't find a trace. Hearts pounding, they wondered if they'd met a ghost. Looking for me? Rogue's voice came from behind them. They jolted and pulled weapons. Most produced knives. The tattooed man showed a black handgun. Expelliarmus! Rogue shouted, worried about the gun. The spell slammed into them and sent their weapons flying. Ghost! They screamed and scattered. Rogue wasn't about to let them get away and fired a handful of stupefy spells in quick succession. The tattooed man, however, somehow blocked one of the spells and melted into the night. How can a muggle resist a spell? Rogue muttered, staring at the stunned boys. He regretted not having Obliviate at hand. He was too soft-hearted to inflict lasting harm with more spells, so he let them go to the mercy of General Winter. Perhaps the bitter cold would teach them a lesson. In a maze of dark alleyways, Igor hurried, as if wolves prowled every corner. He knocked on a door deep in the street. A small window opened. Someone recognized him as the boss's nephew, and the door cracked. Inside, several burly men watched Woody Woodpecker on a battered TV, a pile of guns nearby. Igor rushed upstairs where his Uncle Victor was inspecting newly acquired gold bars. Uncle, I provoked a wizard, Igor said, eyes on the gold. A greedy light flashed across his face. A wizard? Where did you see him? Victor slid bars into a box and locked it in a safe. In the suburbs, a little wizard. Iha and the others led him away. Igor lied, ashamed he had abandoned his friends. Ah, just a little wizard, nothing to worry about, Victor said, patting Igor's shoulder and handing him a glass of wine. Shoot them when they don't expect it. A bullet to the head, that'll do it. Don't go wandering these days. Moscow has changed. Understood, Igor replied and left. As he spoke, he kept touching his collar. Rogge, invisible nearby, noticed and sensed that some charm or device that could resist spells lay there. Go rest, Victor said fondly as his nephew left. He treated Igor like a son he could never publicly claim. Rogge's eyes narrowed. These men weren't amateurs. They were dangerous, and apparently capable of resisting spells. He decided to take a closer look. With a precise stupefy, he dropped Victor in his chair. Then he used Alohomora on the safe. Inside were a few galleons and sickles tucked under a thick stack of bills, and beneath those a blood-stained alchemy notebook hinting at the ugly fate of its original owner. Chapter 68. The Action Begins. Stepping into Igor's room, Rogge found a necklace still hanging around the dead alchemist's neck. It was a silver snakebone chain with an oval golden pendant, etched with intricate symbols and patterns, clearly the work of a skilled alchemist. Rogge's notes identified it as an Accordia amulet. It could deflect one ordinary spell attack every 24 hours. Remembering how Igor had shrugged off a stupefy earlier, Rogge now understood why. The amulet couldn't completely block all spell damage, but it offered strong defensive protection against non-lethal magic. Oh, Mr. Alchemist, consider this payment for avenging you, Rogge muttered as he pocketed the necklace. He also looted the underground arms dealer's cash. Pistols, grenades, explosives, Soviet specialties he thought worth bringing to Moscow. To minimize magical traces, he had Franklin ignite the gasoline barrels. He hoped those villains would have a vivid, fiery dream. Then he left. The next day he was back at the tavern when Alexander returned, accompanied by Semyon, both practically vibrating with excitement. Rogge, they agreed, Alexander shouted. We can go to the Ministry of Magic the day after tomorrow. That scoundrel Lukashenko won't get away this time. We? Rogge repeated. Just the two of you? Of course not, Alexander said. When we storm the ministry to arrest Ukachenko, the other wizards will side with us. Who is Ukachenko? Rogge asked. The current minister for magic, Alexander replied. So you spent all 100,000 galleons and you still expect it to be only the two of you? Rogge rubbed his temples. The brother's confidence made him uneasy. Rogge, don't worry, we'll succeed, Alexander declared. Alyosha, Rogge doesn't seem very confident, Semyon observed plaintively, using Alexander's nickname. He seemed convinced the plan was foolproof. Rogge studied their faces, wondering whether he should already plan an escape route. Start simulation, he said to himself, mapping out possibilities. Simulation 1. 1. The Alexander brothers enter the Ministry of Magic through a secret passage to arrest Ukachenko. 2. Ukachenko immediately calls the Kremlin for help. 3. The Kremlin warns the American Magical Congress, forcing the ministry's wizards to oppose the Alexanders. 4. The Alexanders are arrested and executed half a month later. Rogge said, I'll need a way to distract the Muggles. He looked at the two brothers downstairs, still buzzing. The Soviet Union was gone. Ukachenko, comfortably ensconced as minister, must have cut a deal with the Muggle government. I might as well help you, if it benefits me. He began by neutralizing the library staff. Using Stupefy, he knocked the head librarian unconscious and had Bubble toss the man into a nearby hotel. Master and servant, Rogge and the little elf Bubble, moved through the library like industrious house elves. Rogge smiled as he raised his wand. Under his spell, the books on the shelves stirred and slid out, eager to join this grand evacuation. Bang, bang, bang! Books thudded down from different heights. Some heavy volumes crashed, others floated gently. Fortunately, protective charms prevented them from being crushed. Squared up and aligned like well-trained soldiers, the books formed neat lines at Rogge's feet. 10 undetectable extension charms lay open, their mouths ready to receive the haul. Rogge conducted the operation with precise wand work. Books used their corners like feet, hopping toward the open bags. Heavy tomes spun lightly and slipped inside. Some hovered as if performing a stately adagio. From his wrist to his fingertips, Rogge guided them all in an orderly chorus of plops and clicks. The 10 large bags quickly bulged. Behind him, Bubble waited. As each bag filled, the little elf apparated it to a magically protected warehouse on the outskirts of Moscow. Constant temperature and humidity, a temporary transfer station for the contraband. For 5 straight hours, Rogge's wand never stopped. Bubble made nearly 100 trips. Even Merlin might have protested the exhaustion of it all. Rogge panted. The potion bottles at his feet were empty. Bubble lay on the floor, ears drooping from fatigue. They checked the shelves. The entire library was emptied. Not a paper remained, not even in the basement. "Good work," Rogge said, giving Bubble a thumbs up. Bubble leapt up, but promptly collapsed again. Rogge pulled out a potion to restore magic. They each drank. Their power renewed, but their minds were still drained. "Incendio!" Rogge commanded, and flames leapt along the emptied stacks. He grabbed the final package, and together they vanished from a place that only moments before had smelled of old paper and ink. The bookshelves crashed down with a final deafening roar, their liberation symphony reaching a fervent climax. Start simulation. Simulation 2. 1. The Alexander brothers enter the Ministry of Magic through a secret passage to arrest Ukachenko. 2. Ukachenko calls the Kremlin. 3. No response comes from the Kremlin. The Ministry's wizards stand aside. 4. The Alexanders capture Ukachenko and toss him into prison. "Perfect," Rogge said, peering out the window. Smoke billowed in the distance, alarms began to wail, and Red Square was a blur of emergency vehicles. The Lenin Library had been burning for 6 hours. Rogge thought it deserved at least 3 days and nights of flame. He collapsed onto the bed and fell into a deep, exhausted sleep as if everything outside were someone else's problem. Early the next morning, a thunderous knock shook the door. Alexander burst in. "Rogge, it's time to act." "Coming, coming," Rogge groaned, dark circles under his eyes. He still had books to move at the ministry today. This job was grueling. They traveled to the southwest corner of Red Square under disillusionment charms. Alexander tapped the back of an ancient building 7 times on a particular, wart-covered stone. A black cast-iron door slid open. It looked ancient. The knocker rusted. Only a handful of wizards knew this was the secret entrance to the Moscow Ministry of Magic. Alexander whispered the password and tapped the knocker again. The door yielded to a descending stone passage lit with dim torches. They went down for 10 minutes until they reached a heavy stone door. A large orchid had been carved in the center. Beneath it, a startlingly lifelike sculpture of draped silk appeared to flow from the stone. An inscription in runes read, "Suffering forges glory. Nobility enjoys eternal splendor." Alexander spoke the inscription aloud. A ring of blue fire flared, the carved orchid seemed to bloom, and the stone door went momentarily translucent. He nodded, stepped through, and they entered the ministry. "This is a secret entrance. Only noble wizards know it exists," Alexander said, changing into a ministry staff robe as they moved. Rogge took in the room. Portraits of wizards lined the walls, and beyond a frosted glass partition, he could see the elevators of the ministry moving up and down, an enormous, bureaucratic hive hidden beneath the city. Chapter 69, Fruits of Victory. Alexander pushed open the grand doors and, with Semyon and Rogge at his side, strolled into the Ministry of Magic as if they owned the place. The Moscow ministry was magnificent. Gold filigree caught the light and gleamed. Staff bustled through the halls with tense faces. Paper planes skittered through the crowds, and the occasional shout cut the murmur. A blonde wizard hurried up to them, delivered a whispered message, and melted back into the press. "Ukachenko is in his office. He's the only one inside." "Rogge, we need to split up now," Alexander said, crouching to meet his companion's eye. "If anything goes wrong, look after Ilyana for me." "Don't worry." Rogge nodded, watching as the Smog brothers, Alexander and Semyon, moved toward the minister's office. Everyone in the hall clearly knew who they were. A few wizards reflexively drew wands, then were restrained by companions. The hall froze under an awkward silence as people stepped aside, clearing a straight path to the office. The brothers drew their wands and strode into the opulent room. Outside, the entire ministry waited for the outcome, anticipating which side would win and what that would mean. Rogge slipped into a disillusionment charm and followed the map toward the ministry archives. When he reached the library door, a roar of combat echoed from the minister's office. The fight had begun. "Alohomora!" Rogge tried, but the lock didn't yield, and an alarm shrieked. In a building full of magic, alarms now bloomed everywhere. Nobody heard that single door's cry. Damn it, there's a counter-enchantment. He shut his eyes, thought quickly, and attempted a more complex opening charm. The lock still held. Bubble, bring the explosives, Rogge hissed. He hesitated only a beat before deciding on brute force. He attached a small charge, cast a silencing charm to muffle the blast, and triggered it. The corridor rocked. When the smoke cleared, the door was still intact, but the adjacent wall had cracked. Sectum sempra, Rogge shouted, and with a cutting, precise series of strokes, he widened the gap in the weakened wall. Spells from the office flashed nearer. The battle was pouring into the corridors. Just give me more time, he muttered, and pushed harder. At last, with a thunderous collapse, the wall opened. Rogge and Bubble slipped through into the ministry library. Shelves loomed, titles gleaming in the dim light. Occlumency, the most poisonous magic, advanced dark arts revealed, forbidden arcane arts, covenant of dark resonance. Dark arts texts filled almost every shelf, far more here than Rogge had expected, and among them he even found a battered spellbook annotated with a name he hadn't thought he'd see outside legend, Grindelwald. These books weren't as numerous as those in the Lenin library, but they filled 8 undetectable extension charm boxes, valuable, dangerous tomes, all. Rogge grinned. He had long avoided the school's restricted section to keep Dumbledore from watching him, and he was pleased the principal had forgotten Moscow's own secret holdings. To your new home, he murmured, patting the boxes. Bubble, take these and get out first. The distant sounds of battle were growing faint. Rogge unfolded the map and saw the Department of Mysteries lay in another direction. There wasn't time. He couldn't reach it now. He slipped back into the main hall. The Smog brothers stood tired but triumphant. Minister Ukachenko lay unconscious across from them. Alyosha, welcome back, someone called. Aurors moved in and secured the minister's wand, binding him with a tight binding charm. Officials and onlookers pressed forward with a swarm of congratulations. Peter, a tall wizard who had been watching closely, approached Alexander and his companions. Alexander fixed him with a wary look. Peter, we had an agreement, Alexander reminded. Of course, my brother, thank you for your work. The Moscow Ministry of Magic is independent again today, and we will no longer be subject to Muggle rule. Peter stepped to the center of the hall and addressed the crowd. His voice rolled through the chamber like thunder. From 1920 to 1991, 71 years, we were forced under Muggle governance, forced to help enforce their tyranny. During that time, our wizarding kin were watched, oppressed, and lived in constant fear. He swept his gaze over the assembly. Young wizards and witches disappeared without explanation. They were taken to laboratories, dissected, used for the ambitions of the Muggle government. They endured tortures and experiments. Their screams died in cold, locked rooms. But today, Peter paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Today we have overthrown the Muggle stooge Ukachenko. We can lift our heads again and reclaim our dignity. The Smog brothers are our heroes. They lit courage in our hearts and showed us a new era. Applause and cheers erupted. Wizards clapped and shouted, fire in their eyes. Peter rode the momentum. We will no longer be oppressed or forced to hide our power. Today we stand united to rebuild the glory of the magical world, to pass on our arts, and to let every witch and wizard display their magic with pride. We will remake our world, he cried. Then, swelling with an ugly fervor, he urged, expel Muggles from the magical world. Expel Muggles! Expel Muggles! Rogge watched the crowd's fervor build and sighed. This could turn into a red winter, he murmured. Mr. Peter, don't forget the hydrogen bombs in the Arctic Circle. He stepped forward and warned aloud. If you pursue cruelty without restraint, you could end up worse than Grindelwald. The mention of the Arctic stash and the precedent of Belobog chilled many. The idea of a wizarding conflict touching nuclear weapons lingered like a nightmare. Peter's expression flickered. He had to admit those things were terrifying and beyond any simple magical solution. He composed himself, smoothing the anxiety back into his face. Young sir, who are you? Peter asked, redirecting his attention away from the bombs to Rogge. Rogge Travis, from Britain. I'm here on business. Rogge smiled and took Peter's hand. It was absurdly soft and worldly, the handshake of someone used to polished society. Travis? Peter looked surprised. I thought that family had been wiped out by the British ministry. This city is no place for ordinary business right now, Rogge said. Land, forests, mines, property, everything's lost its old value in the chaos. Chaos is our stepping stone, Mr. Peter, Rogge added. Peter nodded slowly, regard shifting to respect. You are right. Chaos can be the engine of change. Mr. Rogge, since you mentioned the hydrogen bombs, do you have any suggestions? Chapter 70. Sit in rows and divide fruits. Now Moscow's nuclear warheads are being used to protect the Kremlin, Rogge sneered. Peter lit a cigar, smoke curling in the chaotic hall. Laws? He said with a smirk. Rogge chuckled disdainfully. When wizards were put on the dissecting table, no ministry of magic from any country came to help you seek justice. Before you can cut ties completely with muggles, there will always be breaches. That responsibility can only be borne by the future minister, Peter said. Of course. Peter nodded, accepting the responsibility without hesitation. Facing the Smog brothers who had captured the Minister for Magic, he had never had a good reason for other wizards to elect him as minister. Now Rogge had handed him one, a legitimate, weighty cause. The Travis family's business will surely thrive, especially here. Oh, thank you for your favor, Minister. The Travis family will remember it. Rogge flashed his family's pinky ring and clasped Peter's hand firmly. Moscow had plunged into turmoil again for reasons the Muggles never noticed, while the ministries of magic around the world were stunned. Citing Yukachenko's betrayal of the wizarding world and his cover-up of Muggle dissection experiments on wizards, Peter united other ministry officials to impeach the imprisoned minister. He led all the wizards in Moscow to blockade the Kremlin, throwing out boxes of evidence and demanding explanations from the Muggles. Headmaster Dumbledore had no choice but to rush to Moscow during the Christmas holidays to demand Peter not harm Muggles. Under Dumbledore's pressure, both sides agreed that the Muggle government would completely separate from the Slavic magical world and that all property confiscated from noble wizards before 1920 would be returned. The headmaster actually came? Rogge said, flipping through forbidden divisions and popping a big head baby chocolate into his mouth. The book's chapters on creating and using Horcruxes fascinated him. Yes, Albus Dumbledore, the greatest white wizard in the wizarding world today. Semyon poured himself a drink, clearly in high spirits. We brought Yuri in from the ministry. Believe me, no one wants to know what we did to Yuri. Semyon smirked cruelly as he downed the liquor. Does Minister Peter have any plans? Rogge asked. Peter? That damned scoundrel. Semyon cursed angrily. It was clearly our brothers who took down Yukachenko, and the papers are all giving him the credit. Uncle Semyon, you don't actually think you could be minister, do you? Rogge chuckled. To Peter, the Smog brothers were useful as weapons. If they could topple a minister, fine. If not, Peter would discard them. If Alexander had wanted the post, his status as Belobog's founder would make him a contender, but he had no interest in the ministry. He took only a special consultant title and ran off to rebuild the manor he remembered from the Muggle sanatorium. Me? Semyon admitted he had no backing and not many people in the wizarding world knew him. Since that's the case, why not ask Minister Peter for a position? That's right. Why didn't I think of that? Semyon finished his drink in one gulp and rushed out. The International Trade Association offered little work and good pay, and he could travel everywhere at the public's expense, exactly what he had wanted before he'd been dismissed. Time to go back, Rogge stretched, having gained a better understanding of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes from the book. Horcruxes were undeniably powerful. A wizard could split off part of his soul and hide it. When his body died, a part of his soul could remain in the world, allowing him to return. The more Horcruxes created, the greater the chance of resurrection, almost the promise of immortality. Why was Tom so afraid of death? Rogge bit his quill and wrote the question in his notebook. The cost of making a Horcrux was terrifying. It required killing another person to tear out a piece of one's own soul. The act warped the maker's emotions, pushing them toward extremes. Soul incompleteness affects the body's appearance. No wonder Lord Voldemort had no nose. Rogge chuckled to himself and underlined the line. In the final chapter of Forbidden Divisions, the author evaluated dark art's relationship to the soul. Dark arts is not inherently opposite the soul, but intimately tied to it. Dark arts are a dangerous power, morally neutral in themselves. They become good or evil depending on the wielder. They are like a sharp sword to a swordsman. The sword is blameless. Over time, dark arts became synonymous with evil because of the ambition that filled those who wielded it. During study, a wizard's soul is constantly tested. The more one pursued the dark arts, the easier one might fall to its double edge. If the soul could not withstand the test, it would be dragged into a sea of desire, leaving an indelible mark. Conversely, those who could restrain themselves and study dark arts rationally would emerge with a stronger, more profound soul. In short, the relationship between dark arts and the soul is a contest of the mind. Rogge nodded. Dark arts were ultimately a desire amplifier. Some could control themselves, others could not. Slytherin House's many dark wizards and Death Eaters stemmed from an inherent hunger for power and authority, and at the decisive moment, Lord Voldemort became their leader. Does that mean Hogwarts graduates in the past decade haven't been tested by the dark arts? Rogue's eyes lit up. From his observations, the young wizards at Hogwarts hadn't been challenged much. Dumbledore had protected them too well. Aside from the 2 ministry-mandated exams, their studies had been almost stress-free. They clearly could use better study plans, Rogge thought, imagining the customized tests Harry would face in the future and quietly scolding his headmaster for being overly protective. Damn, Paul, he only gave me the position of director of the Department of Transportation. Semyon cursed loudly, though he still sounded pleased. Congratulations, Rogge said with a smile and took a bottle of wine from the cabinet to toast him. Hehe, I have you to thank for reminding me. Semyon sneered at the pub as he prepared to leave. Come on, let's drink freely today. He filled his glass and, seeing Rogge decline, downed it himself. Where's Uncle Alexander? Rogge poured some juice. Alcohol wasn't great for his brain at his age. My brother? Semyon raked a hand over his bald head regretfully. He only wants to rebuild Smog Manor and isn't interested in ministry positions. At that moment, Alexander arrived, dusty from travel, and punched Semyon on the shoulder. Semyon, you know me. I didn't found Belobog for any official post or power. He poured himself a drink and reclined comfortably in the wooden chair. I know, Semyon said quickly. Alyosha, your dream is for the Moscow Ministry of Magic to cut ties completely with the Muggles. But Alyosha, no country's magical world can entirely sever ties with its government. So what? Alexander replied. Of course he knew, but it didn't matter. The key is initiative. 70 years ago, the ministry became the Muggles' lapdog. And now, he stood and shouted, eyes fierce, the glory of the noble wizards is resurfacing. Orchids are blooming across Slavic land. I know you're unhappy with Paul, Semyon said. Yes, the scoundrel you call him. But who else can we choose? Alexander asked helplessly. Semyon, you have to understand, we already got what we deserved. Isn't the director of transportation enough? Bro, you know. Semyon hesitated. Humph. Paul knew as soon as you arrived at the ministry, Alexander spat. That son of a bitch. He's certainly mastered surveillance. Alexander patted his brother's shoulder. Work hard, Semyon. The directorship at the Ministry of Transportation is the Smog family's favor. Semyon grinned and produced an ancient scroll as if it were a surprise. Rogge, this is for you. Rogge took the scroll hesitantly and unrolled it. A faded parchment map showed a hand-drawn coastline and cryptic markings. It's our family's treasure map, Alexander said. They say it points to the treasures of Rasputin, the last court wizard of the Tsar. Rogge stared. Alexander saw the shock on his face and hurried on. We've searched it before and found nothing. The last clue points to Romania. Alexander sighed. That's northwest of the Black Sea, and it's also the Bloodlines' territory. It seems impossible that Rasputin's treasure would be there. Actually, the treasure was divided up back in 1916. This map is basically a keepsake. Alexander smiled apologetically. The honesty in his expression made him almost endearing. I promise I'll pay back the money I owe you. Rogge felt awkward. Whether the map was real or not, being given a family heirloom mattered. It's fine. Our friendship is worth more than galleons, he said earnestly. Well said. Come on, I'll take you out tonight. Broaden your horizons, Alexander declared. Rogge nearly choked on his tea. I'm still young. Wouldn't that be inappropriate? What are you thinking, you brat? Alexander pinched Rogue under the chin, mussing his hair into a bird's nest. He glared at him with mock severity. I mean the Arcanist Circus from the States. They're in Moscow. They're famous across the magical world, the Museum of Oddities. Circus? Rogue's interest cooled. Isn't that just acrobats and trained animals? If I were a muggle, maybe, Alexander said, waving his wand to levitate a wine glass, which floated serenely. But we're wizards. Things like that don't impress us. He clapped the glass back down. They have all sorts of magical creatures, shows you can't see anywhere else. Before Rogue could argue, Alexander hauled him out of the pub into the wind and snow and took him to the outskirts of Moscow. The circus occupied a clearing in a suburban wood. A huge tent rose from the snow, and at the entrance, a dwarf wizard rode atop a troll's neck, handing out enchanted balloons that shifted colors and patterns. 2 tickets, please, Alexander said, patting the troll and slipping 2 galleons into a box dangling from its neck. Of course, sir. Enjoy today's feature, the Talking Puffskein, the dwarf announced. He waved his wand. The troll obliged by tearing off 2 tickets and handing them over with an awkward flourish. The dwarf, hanging upside down from the troll's neck in a comical tumble, produced a balloon and pressed it into Rogue's hands. It was a clown-shaped balloon with a permanently silly grin. Alexander surged into the tent ahead of him. The first thing Rogue saw was a hippogriff, white-headed, brown-bodied, gliding through the air with a young witch clinging to its neck, shrieking with delight as it beat its wings. Merlin's beard, that's incredible. Alexander reached up as if he could touch it. Wait, look! Alexander darted toward a corner. Rogue followed, expecting yet another stunt. There, 5 kappa, small, scaled, vaguely monkey-like water creatures, were clustered with instruments, harps, flutes, and a suited water monkey at a piano, all playing a slow waltz. As it went on, more kappa hopped in, their dancing entirely uncoordinated and gloriously ridiculous. Rogue couldn't help laughing. Damn it, why didn't I bring my instant camera? He muttered, slapping his knee in frustration. A clutch of enchanted balloons bobbed down the aisle. A clown sprawled across them, waving his wand. Audience members reached up for the balloons. Each snatch made the clown squawk in outrage, which only sent the crowd into more fits of laughter. Alexander even snatched one right under the clown's nose. The clown stamped his feet on the balloon in theatrical fury, and the tent erupted. Rogue, over here, the talking Puffskein. Alexander tugged him toward a tall tower where a huge pink Puffskein sat, round and plush. Children crowded close, petting its fur. A small wizard offered it a banana he'd bought from the clown. The Puffskein munched and then, clear as day, said, "Thank you. The banana is delicious." "Aren't Puffskeins scavengers?" Rogue asked, rubbing his eyes as if to wipe away the impossibility. "They are, but scavengers can still enjoy a nice banana." Alexander produced a sickle and bought another banana just to watch the Puffskein reply politely. Rogue found himself wondering whether this Puffskein was an animagus or enchanted in some other way. Then Barnum, the ringmaster, strode into the center. He wore an exaggerated top hat and carried a T-handled cane that flashed when he waved it. "That cane's his wand," Alexander whispered. 40 inches if the stories are true. Barnum bowed with grand flourishes. "Welcome, dear friends, to the Wizard Circus. I am Barnum, your ringmaster." He snapped his fingers. A rainbow blossomed across the tent, and with another snap, rained down shimmering sweets that dissolved into harmless taste bursts on the tongue. Children squealed and scrambled for the candies. Rogue caught one and watched it blossom with surprise and delight. The enchantment was beyond simple transfiguration. Barnum's control was flawless. He danced across the ring, the cane tracing intricate patterns. When he wiped his brow, the white glove he'd worn continued to dance the cane by itself, producing comic confusion. Barnum feigned astonishment and then theatrically argued with his animate glove, the audience roaring with laughter. Suddenly, the cane shot a beam of white light. Rows of audience seats rose up around them in perfect formation and then lifted the occupants into the air. "Rogue, look, we're up!" Alexander shouted, thrilled as their seats rose and turned so they could see the ring from above. "It's incredible," Rogue admitted, craning his neck as the tent filled with cheering witches and wizards, children and elders alike, who threw flowers and coins like confetti. Pillar braziers flared, belching colored pyrotechnics. Rings of fire formed and rose into the air, assembling into the shape of a colossal dragon that writhed overhead in sparks and smoke. The crowd stomped and clapped, voices a single roaring tide of delight. Rogue watched the dragon of flame and felt Alexander's hand on his shoulder, both of them grinning like fools. For a few bright minutes, the world outside the tent, the deaths, the maps, the dark corners of old legends, felt very far away. Everyone gasped as the dragon circled once overhead and suddenly breathed fire toward the crowd. The flames dispersed harmlessly before them, and where they had licked the air, a wizard in a sequined silver robe appeared. He wore an iris-shaped mask. The veil of his costume made him look even more mysterious. He drew his wand, pointed it up, and dozens of white doves burst into being. The doves flew in formation, tracing pattern after pattern across the tent. "So, how about a math contest?" the silver-robed wizard called, and a lucky little wizard was chosen to compete against the doves. Flames formed numerals and equations in the air, simple addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. The boy and the birds were evenly matched, but in the end, the doves fell slightly short and the little wizard won. "Congratulations!" the silver-robed wizard cried, lifting the boy's hand as the doves circled. Under everyone's gaze, a crown of white dove feathers suddenly settled on the little wizard's head. "That's incredible," Alexander shouted. He had already been impressed that the doves could calculate. He hadn't expected them to perform magic as well. Rogue applauded too. The wizarding circus was opening both their eyes. Rogue retracted his earlier dismissals. It really was a good show. Ladies and gentlemen, next in our Monsters and Oddities section, I present to you the Blood Beastman, Barnum proclaimed, stepping forward and waving his wand. A large cage appeared, draped in black cloth. The crowd leaned forward, guessing what lay beneath. The Kaba musicians set up in a corner and began a chaotic, anticipatory tune. "What exactly is it?" Barnum milked the suspense, then slowly whisked away the cloth. A 12-inch-long viper glided into the light. It was jet black, with a distinct triangular mark on its head. Its tongue flicked, it raised itself and watched the assembled wizards with cold, vertical pupils. The little wizards cried out, startled at such a fearsome, magical creature. "Do not be afraid, my friends. This is Nagini, the Blood Beastman. She was once a member of our circus and has now returned to us. Although she has lost the ability to transform back into human form, please believe me, she will not harm anyone," Barnum crowed, trying to reassure the crowd as he opened the cage. "Nagini, where did the circus find her?" Alexander murmured, surprised to see the snake already out of the cage. Rogue remembered. This viper had once been Lord Voldemort's Horcrux. He had been curious where she was, if not in Albania. "What's wrong, Uncle Alexander?" he asked. "My father told me about this circus when he was a boy," Alexander said, watching Nagini slither to the center of the ring at Barnum's command. "He saw her when he was traveling in France." He stared at the viper, puzzled. "They said she escaped once. I heard Dumbledore had something to do with it. I don't know where the circus found her again. My father said she used to be a human." The surrounding wizards murmured, shocked. Nagini seemed to understand music. She danced perfectly to the Kaba musician's eerie, joyful tune. The little wizards, who had been frightened moments before, began to applaud her skill. Fire rings rose in the arena. Nagini leaped through them without flinching. Her scales flashed under the flames. The audience clapped even louder. At the music's climax, she coiled and shot upward, threading herself through a suspended ring and wrapping around it, suspended and writhing in midair. Her movements were lithe and terrifyingly beautiful. No wonder, Nagini had once been a witch, with a first-rate figure and presence. Even as a snake, she retained a disquieting grace. "Uncle Alexander, what a terrifying, mesmerizing dance. Even if she ran away 100 times, the circus wouldn't easily give her up," Rogue murmured, feeling his pulse quicken at the sight. The musicians fell silent, and Nagini descended gracefully. Her performance had enchanted everyone, until Barnum signaled for her to bow. As Barnum bent, Nagini suddenly struck. The giant snake opened her mouth wide, fangs bared, lunging straight for Barnum's neck. A scream ran through the tent. "Be careful," people cried. Some covered their mouths, others shut their eyes. At that critical moment, a flash of red shot from the stands. Rogue, quick to act, drew his wand, and fired Stupefy. The spell stopped Nagini's lunge in mid-strike, and she collapsed to the ground. "Thank you, child," Barnum panted, smelling death. He broke out in cold sweat and clutched a handkerchief to his brow. Still, Rogue's stunning charm had not completely subdued the viper. She began to writhe and slither as if ready to spring back to life. Panic spread. Parents scooped up the little wizards and fled the tent, terrified the snake would break loose. "Incarcerus," Rogue called. A green spell shot from his wand and split into two beams that braided together in the air, binding Nagini with thick, unyielding cords. She hissed and twisted, sending Barnum crashing to his knees, but the spell held her fast. "Quick, put her back in the cage," Barnum ordered, desperate, but none of the circus crew would move. They were frozen with fear. "Mr. Barnum, it seems the wizarding circus doesn't have the means to handle Nagini," Rogue said bluntly. He had watched Barnum's flashy tricks and realized they were useless in a real emergency. "No, it was just an accident. An accident. Of course I can control her." Barnum protested, unwilling to admit failure. "This is Director Smog from the Moscow Ministry of Magic," Rogue added, indicating Alexander, since both of them shared the same name. "I think he has something to say on the matter." "You should consider how to placate the audience, Mr. Barnum," Alexander said coldly. "I don't suppose you want a ministry investigation?" Barnum stammered, but Alexander pressed on. "I heard she escaped before. Are you telling me you've recaptured and imprisoned a blood beastman? This isn't 60 years ago. Blood beastmen have the same rights now. Your imprisonment could be illegal." "No, absolutely not," Barnum blurted. "Director Smog, she's completely transformed, an irrational beast." "She can't turn back. She's a real snake," Barnum insisted, desperately trying to avoid being sent to Gobelarg, a place he feared. 20 years ago, when we performed in Hogsmeade, Ringmaster Skander found her again. Back then, she was already a viper. Anyone in the circus can attest to that. "Then where is Skander?" Alexander demanded, leaning in. "Did you kill him?" Chapter 73, Lily of the Valley. "It wasn't me. It's Nagini," Barnum blurted, pain written all over his face. When Skand found her in the Highlands, she was a complete beast. He thought a whip would tame her, but she launched a sneak attack. "So you kept her?" Alexander shook his head. They were all such greedy people. "Mr. Barnum, are you sure you can handle a dangerous magical creature like that?" His tone was a warning. Rogge eased the rope restraining Nagini, and the snake immediately writhed, testing the bonds with violent force. "No more. I don't want her. Take her away. That damned maledictus. I should have killed her ages ago." Barnum glared at the enormous head looming over him, his pants wet with fear. "We'll take care of her," Rogge said. He cast a powerful stupefy aimed at Nagini's skull. The bolt hit home and she slumped, glaring at the small wizard before going limp. "Rogge, she's very dangerous," Alexander warned, watching Nagini float, immobilized, beside him. "I know," Rogge replied, but he didn't tell Alexander what nagged at him. Nagini would someday become one of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes. Now that he had intercepted her, he was very curious what Voldemort would have done. Maledictuses like Nagini were rare in the magical world. "All right," Alexander said, seeing Rogge's resolve. "Keep a close eye on her. Be vigilant. If necessary, kill her immediately." He fell silent for a moment, then added, "Strange. How did they find Nagini in the Scottish Highlands?" The Christmas trip to Moscow had been fruitful but short. Rogge and Bubble returned to Britain with scores of books, lending from the Moscow Ministry's library and, more problematically, the more than 30 million Muggle volumes Rogge had smuggled out. There simply wasn't space for them in the London house. From the living room to the attic, from the bathroom to the kitchen, even the garage, stacks of books rose to the ceiling. Shelves were completely buried. Only thin passages remained, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Rogge, what are you going to do with all these Muggle books?" Jessica demanded, hands on her hips, unusually angry. She craned her neck to take in the towers of paper. "This is not Ollivander's shop." She glanced at the cage where Nagini reared, her tongue flicking, which sent Yumi and Diana scurrying up the stairs in terror. "And this snake." "Mom, please, calm down," Rogge said carefully. "I can use the undetectable extension charm on the study and make it large enough, and Nagini can go into a nabag." "Fine." Jessica folded her arms and glared. If you haven't sorted all of this before school starts, I'll burn every single one of these muggle books." Faced with his mother's fury, Rogge dared not argue or tell her this was only 1/10 of the haul. "Bubble, can we use Travis Manor?" he asked the house elf. School would start in 3 days. The undetectable extension charm alone wouldn't finish the job in time. "The manor is old and falling to ruin, Master," Bubble warned. "It will take a great many galleons to make it habitable." "Bring me there," Rogge insisted. With Bubble's help, they apparated to Travis Manor. January in Ireland brought a cold, damp sea breeze. A desolate cobblestone drive wound toward the old house, trees on either side stripped bare, their branches like skeletal hands against the gray sky. A thin film of snow lay on the grass, revealing dead blades here and there. At the drive's end, the manor crouched, vines strangling its stone, the gate mottled with corrosion and its knocker hanging loose. Rogge pushed. The whole gate gave way with a crash. A damp, rotten smell spilled out. In the square, a huge fountain stood dry and choked with weeds. The statues ringed around it were pitted and unrecognizable. The manor's main building rose behind cracked steps. The gray-black walls were sullied with fissures. Broken panes reflected the weak January sun. The heavy front door was smashed inward, a battered remnant hanging upside down on one hinge. When Rogge stepped through the creaking gap, the magical portraits inside erupted into an accusing clamor. "Thief! Mundungus the thief is here to steal again," roared a portrait of a bewhiskered old wizard. "Help! Drive the thief away!" shrieked an elderly woman in a powdered wig, brandishing a painted cane. "The bastards at the ministry stole all the good antiques already," a hooded portrait with cat-like eyes snarled. "What's left for thieves to take? Get out! You want to steal our worthless old paintings too?" A dour middle-aged wizard snapped, shaking his pictorial fist. "Damn Dumbledore! He got his revenge on the Travises. I always knew it." The voice came from an upside-down portrait, which caught Rogge's attention. He plucked the upended portrait from the wall and blew the dust off. "May I ask who you are?" he said. The man on the canvas was in a gray tweed coat and bowler hat. He glowered as if he would like to leap from the frame and bite at Rogge. "Me?" He straightened his collar. "Torquil Travis, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at the Ministry at the start of the century. The man who put Gellert Grindelwald in Nurmengard. Boy, do you want to hear the secret between Dumbledore and Grindelwald?" Torquil interrupted himself, leaning in conspiratorially. "The secret between the greatest white wizard and the most dangerous dark wizard in the world. Grandpa Torquil, tell him," an eager voice piped up. The older portraits had suddenly become intrigued. Rogge smiled and bowed to the assembly. "I should have introduced myself. I'm Rogge Travis. My father is Theodore Travis. My mother, Jessica Travis." "Impossible," the woman in the silver wig squealed. "The last male Travis was Buck. He's in Azkaban." "Wait, Annie." Torquil ruffled his painted beard. "I seem to remember Theodore had a child, but I thought the ministry killed him." "Grandpa Torquil, I am that child." Rogge held up the family signet ring. The portraits fell into a low murmur. "I took a killing curse back then," Rogge added quietly, "but I survived." "I won't believe it unless your name is on the family tree," Grandma Annie demanded, pointing toward the fireplace. She told him to seek the family's hidden genealogical tome. Rogge hesitated, then found a small, dust-caked book tucked behind the hearth. When he unfolded it, a gigantic tree sprung up from its pages, branches sprouting with nearly 100 male portraits. By Travis tradition, every male child was named for the Latin scientific name of a plant, and that name was inscribed beneath his portrait. Theodore, Rogge's father, was marked as an oak. Buck, the imprisoned man, was monkshood. Torquil was spruce. Rogge scanned until he found his own entry, Lily of the Valley, Muguet. The family tree looked lush in design, but most of its names were blackened, the corresponding portraits dimmed, dead branches on the once great line. To the amazement of the house portraits, 2 faces on the tree still glowed, Buck Travis and Rogge Travis standing now before them. "It checks out," Rogge said, nodding. The tree recognized bloodline, not body. At the call of the old books, a warm, affectionate murmur replaced the earlier hostility. "Muguet!" Torquil exclaimed, the portrait's tone suddenly fulsome. Around the room, the portrait wizard's attitudes shifted completely. Suspicion gave way to a curious, familial fondness. Chapter 74. submerge your thoughts in a sea of books. Your name is Muge. That's the pet name we gave you, the old bearded wizard shouted, practically vibrating with delight that the family line might continue. It sounds French, Rogge murmured, still unused to it. You can still call me Rogge. All right, Muge, Rogge. Torquil beamed at him, then hurriedly asked, Child, how is the wizarding world now? It's peaceful, Rogge said, flicking his wand to rehang the Elder's magical portraits on the wall. Lord Voldemort is dead, and Headmaster Dumbledore is busy knitting sweaters at Hogwarts. Damn it, if that's really true, the Travis family won't be able to rise again, one portrait exclaimed. Why would that bother you, Grandpa Torquil? Rogge asked. Rogge, I ruined everything, Torquil said, his voice breaking as he began to tell his story. Back then, a dark wizard rose in the European magical world, Grindelwald. I led the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to pressure Dumbledore to deal with his old lover. After I died, the Travis family declined. Perhaps Dumbledore retaliated. Later generations were swayed by Lord Voldemort and became Death Eaters. Now, only you two remain. Rogge frowned. Given Dumbledore's influence, it didn't add up that a single action would have annihilated the family. Before he could argue, the other portraits surged forward and gave Torquil a symbolic drubbing. Torquil begged for mercy, pleading that the child be spared. Rogge, where are you living now? One of the portraits asked. My mother and I live in London, Rogge answered. London? No wonder Jessica came by and took Bubble with her earlier. That woman. Grandma Annie sniffed. She clearly disapproved of Jessica, but for Rogge's sake, she kept some of her comments to herself. Why are you here this time, child? I've got a huge batch of books and no room in the London house, so I came to see about storing them here. Rogge glanced at the manor's disarray and felt a headache coming on. With all these talkative ancestors around, it was no wonder Jessica had avoided this place. I'm sorry, child. It's just as you see, Grandma Annie said helplessly. The ministry messed up the manor. If it hadn't been for Torquil, they would have used fiendfire to burn this place down. Rogge could hear the pain in her voice. The once grand manor had fallen into neglect and pillage, another bitter wound for the elders. After my time, many dark wizards came and looted, especially that Mundungus Fletcher. He kept coming. That damned thief stole whatever he could. Torquil ranted, but the portraits could do nothing about it. So much is missing, we can't fully reparo it. If you want to store books here properly, you'd need to renovate the whole thing. To keep the manor worthy of the Travis name, you'd be looking at least 1 million galleons. How much? 1 million? Rogge's eyes widened. Yes, and that's just the basic cost to make it presentable, the bearded wizard said. You'd need ancient, magnificent collectibles to decorate it, indispensable for preserving a pure-blood family's honor. Stop, Rogge swallowed. The demand was absurdly high. Now he understood why some families had abandoned the old pure-blood pretensions. I'm only looking for a warehouse to store books. Renovating the manor can wait. He tuned the elders out, waved his wand, and began repairs himself. Overturned furniture, cracked railings, and the ruined main door snapped back into place at his command. The house still looked empty and a little ragged, but acceptable. Let's get rid of this furniture for now. Rogge pointed his wand and cleared away what he didn't need. Then he prepared the house to be a proper storage space, dust-proofing, insect-proofing, waterproofing, and enchantments against fire and rot. He cast spells to regulate temperature and humidity throughout the building. Rogge, spellbooks have magic. They don't need such a rigid environment, Torquil protested. Grandpa, I'm not storing spellbooks here. Rogge opened his undetectable extension bag, and a fluttering tide of books spilled out, thousands at first, then more. Some were beautifully bound with gilded patterns, others were worn leather, edges frayed. They represented the accumulated knowledge of many eras. These are Muggle books, one of the portraits exclaimed in horror. Throw them out. I told you they're not spellbooks, Rogge said, ignoring them. He was still in the process of moving volumes from a warehouse on the outskirts of Moscow. Book after book rose and stacked itself into neat rows. Literature, mathematics, art, architecture, history, nearly every field of study was represented. Essentials of Eastern medicine, Newton's laws, linear algebra. The sheer variety stunned the portraits. They had never imagined the Muggle world could be so deep and vast. The enormous living room filled quickly, floor giving way to layer upon layer of books until it resembled a rising flood. "Stop!" the portraits cried, watching the hall slowly vanish beneath paper and cloth. "This is only the beginning," Rogge said calmly, and gestured for Bubble to bring more. The main hall of the manor measured about 2,000 square meters and, with its three-story height, could hold roughly 3 million volumes. But Rogge had far more than that, 30 million books in total, requiring at least 150,000 cubic meters of space. The vast main room suddenly seemed tiny. He began to take walls down and demolish unnecessary staircases and bedrooms. Since he planned to rebuild the place anyway, he didn't mind the damage. "Stop it, child," Torkel pleaded, despair in his eyes. But the books kept coming. One day later, every room in the manor was packed with books. Whenever the portrait elders opened their eyes, an unbroken mountain of books stared back at them. Even if most of the volumes were in Russian, the sheer scale made them dizzy. "Perhaps there will be more books here yet," Rogge said with a smile, the final straw. The ancestors who had clung to pure-blood ideals were stunned when they learned this was only the collection from a single library in one Eastern European country. The books from that one place were enough to upend their assumptions. The wider world of knowledge stretched far beyond what they had imagined. Even if all the books in the entire wizarding world were gathered together, they wouldn't equal half of what was now here. Faced with that immense sea of learning, the portraits fell silent. Maybe the true inheritance the family needed wasn't a bloodline, but living knowledge, something to explore and learn from. The 2-week Christmas holiday passed quickly, but satisfyingly. Rogge regretted he hadn't seen who ultimately won the event prize, but he waved goodbye to Jessica at King's Cross, carrying Nagini in a nabog and a few dark arts tomes about blood curses in his suitcase. In the train car, little witches and wizards ran about with magical instant cameras, shutters clicking all the while. "That sounds good," Rogge smiled as he sat. To him, the clicking shutters were the pleasant jingle of a cash register. The magical instant camera had taken the British wizarding world by storm, supplanting the old antiques. Except for a few staunch traditionalists, no one bought the old-style cameras anymore. A basic flash-forming set sold for only 9.9 galleons, and every month there was a photography contest with a grand prize of 100 galleons. With prizes like that, who wouldn't want a set? Chapter 75, Hermione's Complaint. The craze for the magic instant camera that started in Diagon Alley quickly swept across Europe and even drew wizarding families from across the Atlantic. They came in droves, hoping to partner with the Travis family. My mother, Jessica, took personal charge. Aside from a little hesitancy from some American partners, everything was falling into place. Everything, that is, except the blasted reconstruction of the family manor. So expensive? Blast it. Rogge let out a gust of hot air and balled the parchment into a wad. The wizard construction firm he'd contacted, seeing it was a pure-blood family job, had promptly quoted obscene prices. 100,000 galleons for the design, 200,000 for materials, 300,000 for construction, another 200,000 for safety systems and magical installations, and the library alone would be 500,000. Even after stripping out all entertainment features, the simplest version still came to about 1.5 million galleons. A top luxury manor? Over 10 million, land not included. No wonder the Malfoys seized Muggle land back then, Rogge muttered. Building a proper wizard manor costs a fortune. Besides moving staircases and extension charms, what are those old blueprints even worth? He decided to have Andrew solicit bids from the Muggles. A basic design from a Muggle studio could be far cheaper. With a budget of around 1 million galleons, he thought they could get a top-tier solution, and building materials could be purchased from Muggle suppliers. I refuse to believe every enchantment needs special magic materials. If it comes to it, I'll buy goblin metal. It can't cost this much. Only the core construction and the installation of certain enchantments would truly require wizarding work. But using British Muggle builders would mean the Ministry of Magic wouldn't authorize the project, and their pace would leave the manor unfinished for decades. Rogge sketched his requirements, did a quick tally, and figured that with wizard construction and necessary magical facilities, A 200-acre manor could be done for at most 500,000 galleons. As for decoration, that could be cut. Still, it was tight. Jessica refused to approve more than 300,000. Figure the rest out, she said, and left him to his own devices. In his mother's terms, the exchange rate should have been plenty to buy a manor near London and still have change left. What am I supposed to do? Rogge collapsed on the table and started inventorying the magical items he had. The flash disappearance potion recipe was a golden goose, but unsellable. Troll remains, 50 galleons at best. Rasputin's treasure map, hopeless. The only item with any real value was the number 101 golden snitch. Even if it doesn't fetch 1,000,000, 500,000 or 600,000 should do, he told himself, turning the collector's snitch over and over, reluctant to give up the secret he suspected it held. He'd tried brute force attempts to crack it and found nothing. The snitch's surface was covered in a tiny pattern that looked like constellations. Sirius, Sagittarius, Cerberus. Why did I forget to bring an astronomy book? Rogge adjusted his monocle and squinted at the minute dots. Each was a star. Connecting them would form a complex star chart. Bowman Wright had lived around 1200. Back then, the night sky looked different. He tried to make sense of the pattern, but it was maddening. Rogge, I finally found you. Hermione's arrival snapped him out of his reverie. She was carrying luggage and looked like she wanted to throw it at him. Hermione, Merry Christmas. What's wrong? Rogge asked. What's wrong? Don't you know underage wizards aren't allowed to use magic outside school? Hermione's eyes flicked to a scarf by his side, and a small smile curved her lips. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the parchment Rogge had given her as a Christmas present. A spell written in neat ink. The spell you gave me. I can see it, but I can't use it. I've had to watch it all holiday long. It's infuriating. Rogge's face froze. He had completely forgotten that rule. He'd been using magic all through the Christmas break, and the ministry hadn't come after him. I honestly forgot, he said, giving an embarrassed laugh. But the ministry didn't say anything. You don't know? Hermione's tone turned reproving. She had been warned herself after performing Transfiguration in front of her parents. Ministry officials had come straight away with a thick book of statutes to lecture her. She flipped through it now and read aloud, precise and impatient. Article 14.A1.2 of Prohibitions on the Use of Magic by Underage Wizards. A trace is placed on an underage wizard's wand, and it's only removed when they reach adulthood. She kept going. A.2. Underage wizards are forbidden from using magic outside a magic school. Rogge's brow shot up. Is my trace broken? He pulled his wand from his robe. A silver thread of light wove through the ebony grain. The trace was plainly visible. Hermione softened a little when she saw him. There is an exception. She flipped further. B.1. Underage wizards who use magic in certain permitted circumstances will not be prosecuted, registered magical locations, wizarding villages, or in cases of emergency. Oh, Rogge nodded slowly as it clicked into place. I rarely use magic in London, but I used a lot back at the ancestral home. That explains it. Hermione's confusion turned to curiosity. Is your ancestral home in a wizarding village? Are there many wizards there? Any magical creatures? It's very remote, more wilderness than village. I'm not all that familiar with the area either, he admitted. Hermione sighed. I've never been to a wizarding village. There was a pause, then she changed the subject. How are you getting on at Gryffindor? Rogge blinked. Me? Hermione's answer came softly. It's okay. The professors like me. Daphne and I are making do. Harry and Ron are friends. I guess I'm trying. Her forced smile didn't reach her eyes. There was a bitterness beneath it. Rogge had always thought Hermione more suited to Ravenclaw. He suspected Old B, whose strategies he didn't fully understand, might be trying to put together a new kind of team for Harry, even echoing the founders in some way. He couldn't help but imagine that in certain eyes he might resemble Salazar Slytherin's role. That's not necessarily true, Hermione snapped suddenly, waving a small fist. Bravery doesn't belong to one house alone. Rogge smiled faintly. She hadn't expected his next remark. Everyone says Slytherin are dark wizards and Death Eaters, he said, completing the thought she had left unsaid. Then quietly, as if sharing a wound, he added, Hermione, although you come from a Muggle family, your background is clean compared to mine. Eh? Hermione stared, surprised. After the Quidditch scuffle, she'd looked up hateful terms like mudblood and understood how vicious such labels could be. Hearing a pureblood say such a thing to her unsettled her. My parents followed you-know-who, Rogge said, letting the name hang unspoken. The first thing I saw in this world was darkness. He gave a small, rueful smile. Family is our first label. Some people spend their lives trying to shake it off. How many actually succeed? Even if they do, people still look at them with prejudice. He looked at Hermione, earnest and oddly vulnerable. Imagine what would happen if a wizard as remarkable as me ended up in Gryffindor. No one can compare to me, not even Harry Potter, the so-called savior of the wizarding world. The thing is, I'm handsome too. Those Gryffindors will be green with envy. Maybe when I graduate, I won't even have any friends, Roger said, striking a pose. The compartment brightened instantly. Hermione rolled her eyes at him. She couldn't argue his vanity away, but she could show her disapproval. On the other hand, in Slytherin everyone comes from similar circles. No one here looks down on another. Take Malfoy. He may oppose me, dislike me, even fight me, but he would never ostracize me. Hermione, do you know why there are so many dark wizards from Slytherin? Roger asked. She opened her mouth to answer, then thought better of it and stayed silent. There are lots of theories, family tradition, pure blood ideology, he continued. But if that were the whole story, why would every student need a professor's signature to enter the restricted section? Hermione lowered her head and thought. Roger was suggesting something else. The danger of the dark arts. Once you touched them, it was easy to slip into darkness. To be honest, he added, Sectum Sempra was invented by Snape. It has traces of the dark arts. Do you still want to learn it? Of course I do, Hermione said firmly. She couldn't forget that night when he told her to go first and face the troll alone. She wanted to stand and fight with Roger, not flee in panic. But be careful with it. Sectum Sempra is more powerful than people say. And I have one request. What? Please don't teach it to Harry Potter and Ron Weasley. I promise, Roger said, and then hesitated. Hermione pressed on. Tell me why. Harry's father is James Potter. Hermione's memory flicked to the trophy room. She'd seen that name. James and Snape were at school the same year, sorted differently. Snape, a half-blood, ended up in Slytherin. James, surprisingly, went to Gryffindor. They didn't get along. Roger's voice grew serious. James gathered Black, Lupin, and Peter and bullied Snape relentlessly. Once it got so bad it almost cost Snape his life. Later, he managed to win over the girl Snape loved. That girl was Lily Potter. Hermione covered her mouth. She had never pictured Harry's father like that. Roger added, That's my interpretation. Maybe you'll see it differently when you learn more. But Snape's hatred ran deep. If it had been me, I might have killed them. A strange feeling tugged at Hermione as Roger spoke. To him, Snape was a wolf in sheep's clothing, outwardly formidable, inwardly a man ruined by love. He had lost the woman he loved, chosen a life of secrecy and espionage, and spent his days in a sunless dungeon, replaying the past. Perhaps he punished himself for failing to save Lily. Roger sighed and stared out at the rolling countryside. He's a prisoner without a lock, trapped by grief until the end. No wonder he hates Harry so much. He even tried to knock him from his broom during a Quidditch match. Roger's tone shifted. Still, a true knight protects his princess. The headmaster may dislike Harry, but he wouldn't truly harm him. Harry is the only child of that woman. And people who are blinded by that kind of devotion don't fare well. People who what? Hermione asked, stunned. She'd heard Roger use blunt expressions before, but this was different. It's like saying, my goddess may marry 1,000 times, but I'll treat her like my first love, Roger explained. Hermione's face went a dozen colors as she tried to picture his meaning. Roger, your mouth is poisonous, she scolded. That's supposed to be moving, and you describe it like... She cut herself off with a huff. Move on. He only loves himself, okay? Roger shrugged. Hermione slammed her hand over her ears. Stop talking. I'm not listening. You promised, she reminded him, turning back. You can't teach them that spell. Otherwise, Roger clenched his fist, I'll beat them half paralyzed. They won't be able to cast for life. Hermione studied his expression and knew he wasn't joking. When it came to defending Slytherin, Roger was terrifyingly serious. What surprised her most was how his feelings about Snape had changed since Christmas. He'd once admired and respected the man. Now there was something gentler in it, a tender pity. For the rest of the trip, they bent over the golden snitch, trying to decode the star map etched on it. Using a thin stream of water, they traced constellations in the air. Leo should be a bit higher, Hermione instructed, holding the snitch while Roger adjusted its angle. Like this? He asked, tilting it. She nodded. A little to the right. No, not that far. A shade to the left. Her meticulous corrections made the pattern line up perfectly with the tiny chart. Hermione, there's not much time left, Roger said, glancing at the curve of the tracks as the train began to turn. Give me the camera. It's on top. Not the handbag, the box, he snapped, louder than he meant to. Startled, Hermione fumbled and dropped her knapsack. It hit the floor but didn't burst open, a relief. Roger, you scared me, she scolded, opening the box. Inside the undetectable extension charm container were books she had never seen before. The top two read Vampire Secret Lore, The Magical Genetics of Dark Blood and Occlumency. Dark Arts? Hermione's pulse quickened. She slid an instant camera out and snapped a photo of the snitch. Okay, I've taken the picture. Roger breathed easier. As the train turned, the distilled star chart collapsed into a ball of water and shot out the window. He picked up the bag and checked it carefully before tucking it away. I'm sorry I startled you. Hiding something? Hermione asked, worried. Friends shouldn't hide things from one another. If there was trouble, they could share it. I went to Eastern Europe over the holiday and brought back a few things, Roger said, opening the box so Hermione could see the Dark Arts volume. Her eyes widened. It's a dark arts book? She asked sternly. The school forbade students from reading such texts without permission. Relax, Roger said, closing the box and leaning forward. It's not the sort of book that teaches dangerous spells. It's about a blood curse. A blood curse? Hermione had never heard the term before. Even the name made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. It's an ancient bloodline curse, a form of blood magic. The old incantations are lost, but its effects linger, Roger explained. To prevent her from digging too deep, he gave her the bare outline. There are people born with the curse who can transform into animals. Natural animagi? Hermione blurted, intrigued. That sounds like a gift. Why is it a curse? Chapter 77, Dungeon Daily. Yes, a natural animagus. But as they age, they can lose their emotions and sanity and truly become beasts. Roger pointed to the Nabog, explaining why he'd called Hermione over. The Nabag's holding a viper. It used to be a blood beastman. Can I see it? Hermione asked, curiosity bright in her voice. No, Roger shook his head, strict. It's dangerous, Hermione. Even the troll we met might not be enough. Hermione covered her mouth in surprise, eyes fixed on the old bag. If it had been opened, she might have been killed. If it's so dangerous, why are you bringing it to school? People say Hogwarts is safer than Gringotts, Roger admitted, patting the bag and grumbling about the troll incident on Halloween. I need the professors. I want to try to break the blood curse. His sincerity moved Hermione, and she nodded, dropping her questions about the magic book in the box. Along the rough dirt road, carriages pulled by thestrals creaked past and occasionally stopped. They carried students, swaying as they moved along. Roger, what are you looking at? Hermione asked, noticing his gaze. Thestrals. You can only see them if you've witnessed death. Roger's expression was complicated as the thestrals' shapes reflected in his pupils. Their large black heads and thin, powerful bat-like wings were shrouded in shadow, like condensed death. Up close, their skeletal faces showed eerie blue eyes. Terrifying creatures, he said. Hermione hugged herself instinctively. She was glad she couldn't see them, but felt sorry for Roger. They're born out of death's shadow and carry its strange power, he added, marveling at the uncanny artistry of the magical world. The start of term was bittersweet. Ileana had transferred back to Moscow and left only a farewell letter explaining she'd enrolled at Koldovstoret's magic school. Before Roger could dwell on it, he was summoned by Professor Snape. After months of study, his address for Snape had shifted from Dean to Professor. Snape kept the same impassive face, neither accepting nor refusing the change. March sunlight lingered a little longer, but Snape's mood was as gloomy as ever. It seemed the world owed him something. He never mentioned the Christmas gift, and didn't appear to have received the cloak Roger had given him. His hair was long and a bit greasy, his robes black, and his cold eyes made people afraid to meet them. Standing in the dying light, Snape told Roger to stop submitting potions assignments. Roger's hopeful smile faltered. Then Snape added, with the same clipped tone, "I will make random inspections of past potions at any time. They must be brewed in front of me." This was nothing like the leniency of class. Harsh didn't cover it. Snape would ask questions at any moment. A single slip in the answer meant you'd have to stop and rebrew. Even the arrangement of test tubes or the last drops in a cauldron could earn you an hour of his scolding. Roger, drained, left the dungeon feeling as if he'd been released from prison. "Damn Snape. Just you wait," he muttered, clutching his textbook as he headed for the library, where Madame Pince regarded him like a thief. "I refuse to believe I can't be a matchmaker," Roger muttered to himself, wondering about the pen-pal relationship he'd been trying to foster. Sitting in his usual spot, he took out his thick error log. The Wiggenweld potion had finally passed assessment. He sighed in relief and signed his name beneath his hand-drawn potion diagram. "I should reward myself," he said aloud, standing up in the library and looking around. Then he sat again, disappointed. "There's nothing to do," he added with a wry smile. Hogwarts had no game consoles or karaoke bars. Aside from Gabrathian fire and flying brooms, there was only mischief. And I still need to figure out how to make money. He pulled out the design proposals Andrew had sent and left notes asking for revisions. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked when he noticed Hermione looking gloomy and helped her carry her books. "Nothing." Hermione pouted and sat down beside him, unwilling to say more. Harry and Ron arrived, carefully placing their books on the table under Madame Pince's watchful eye. They sat next to one another, but seemed reluctant to speak. "The hoe does wonders if you know how to handle it. You really can dig up any corner," Roger said with his usual sly smile. "Harry, this book doesn't even mention Nicholas Flamel," Ron complained, scratching his head. Since Hagrid's slip, they'd been hunting for clues. Neither recent wizarding publications nor modern histories of magic had any entry for a wizard named Nicholas Flamel. "I'm sure I've heard the name," Harry said, puzzled. "I just can't remember where." "Ask Hermione," Harry suggested softly. Ron hesitated. He had offended Hermione and didn't want more humiliation, then nodded. "You go." Hermione nodded and allowed Harry to sit. Roger, seeing them hesitate, pretended to remember an experiment and made a prompt exit. "See you tomorrow," he said kindly as he left. Once Roger was gone, Harry edged forward and asked, "Hermione, do you know Nicholas Flamel?" Hermione put down her copy of Great Discoveries in Modern Magic and blurted, "Mainstein." "Who's Mainstein?" Harry frowned. Hermione clearly knew someone. He just didn't recognize the name. "No, not Mainstein," Hermione corrected herself, remembering Roger had once mixed the names up. "I mean Nicholas Flamel." "You're confusing me," Harry admitted. "Do you have a picture card?" "A picture card?" Hermione repeated. "Dumbledore's picture card," Harry clarified. "Oh, Ron has it." Harry waved Ron over. Ron produced Dumbledore's picture card from his pocket, and Hermione pointed to a line in the short biography, highly successful in alchemy with his partner, Nicholas Flamel. So that's why it felt familiar, Harry realized. It was in Dumbledore's biography. Madame Pince shushed them sharply, and they lowered their voices. "Hermione, is there a book about him?" Harry asked, eager. Meanwhile, Roger was sprawled on the sofa in the room of requirement. Other places might be monitored, but here he could think. He frowned. He'd nearly forgotten about Harry and the whole detention fiasco from first year. Second year, first semester. Hagrid got a dragon. Harry got caught out of bed, the Forbidden Forest, and the unicorn. Suddenly, a memory clicked. If he hadn't heard Nicholas Flamel's name, he might have forgotten entirely that he'd never served detention. Roger touched his wand, and uncertain of his own strength against an adult wizard like Professor Quirrell, even if Voldemort's soul was fragmentary, he ran a practice simulation. 1. You found Snape to discuss the detention. Snape told you to go back and wait for news. Later, you received a detention note. Gather at the main gate at 11 p.m. Hagrid put you in another group, and you encountered Professor Quirrell chasing a unicorn in the Forbidden Forest. Your vigilance paid off, and you blocked Professor Quirrell's magic in time. The cold arrow shot by the centaur was redirected by Quirrell, and you were accidentally injured. Hagrid saved you, and you ended up in the infirmary, missing the Philosopher's Stone and the House Cup. Stop the simulation. Roger shouted in his head. What the hell? Did it just end with me in a sickbed? Chapter 78, Patron Saints and Magical Clubs. Missing the final exam could mean being held back, and Rogge wasn't willing to leave his future to someone else's whim. He ran another quick simulation in his head. 1. You predict going to the Forbidden Forest and cautiously avoid Quirrell. Malfoy's prank changes the grouping. You and Harry encounter Quirrell. 3. You use a spell on Quirrell, but you can't resist. Escape alone. Harry is rescued by a centaur, and the story of Rogge the deserter spreads through the school. Simulation stopped. A deserter is better than being crippled, he muttered, grim-faced. Fortunately, the future wasn't set in stone. Unicorns were good. Rogge's eyes darted as an idea formed. He hurriedly wrote home asking Bubble to send some Soviet specialties. He couldn't ignore spells either. His wand carried a trace, which made dark arts dangerous to use, but Sectum Sempra was still an option. For defense, he had Expecto Patronum, and he needed to master the shield charm fast to block ordinary spells. If Quirrell knew the unforgivable curses, Rogge admitted to himself, his only real plan might be to run. Reality settled in. He took out his alchemy notebook and sketched plans to turn the troll hide he'd acquired into anti-curse equipment. At the same time, he kept practicing spells until his magic ran low. What will my Patronus be? He raised his wand again. Silver light burst from the tip, but remained formless. The panel could only amplify power, not divine mysteries. Rogge needed to condense his Patronus. He remembered the first time he'd cast Expecto Patronum in Azkaban, and the clear image of his happiest memories. He breathed deep, cleared his mind, and let bright, joyful scenes gather. Expecto Patronum, he whispered. Silver-white light flared and coalesced into a vivid shape, a raven, wings outstretched, shimmering as though dusted with starlight. It circled once, then landed gently on his shoulder, its eyes bright and alert. A raven? Rogge both laughed and felt pleased. He had once fancied dragons or Keelans, but a raven suited a wizard well. Exhausted after practice, he trudged back to the common room and almost ran into Malfoy, who was slipping out the portrait hole. Malfoy, out so late? Rogge asked. Rogge, good evening. Malfoy's smile was forced, guilty as if caught sneaking. In the last 6 months, Rogge had become the leader of the Little Wizards by strength and presence. Older students disliked him, but they couldn't stop him being called the Shadow Prefect. Malfoy now felt a chill whenever he saw him. Club activity tonight? Rogge asked. Yes, Malfoy stammered. Count me in? Malfoy wanted to refuse. He had heard Harry was going to take a dragon away tonight and meant to report them, but he forced a nod. All right, see you tomorrow. Rogge smiled and began to walk back to his dormitory. Malfoy stood frozen a moment and then let out a huge sigh of relief as the door closed. Oh, right. Rogge turned suddenly. Malfoy nearly jumped out of his skin. If Filch catches you, it won't end well. It won't, Malfoy said quickly and bolted from the common room. Rogge shrugged. He didn't have time for moralizing. He opened the crate Bubble had sent, a Stechkin APS pistol with a dozen RGO and RGN grenades tucked beside it. A Soviet surprise like this would catch Quirrell off guard. As for the damage a high-explosive shrapnel round might do to the school grounds, well, the Ministry would deal with that problem if it came. As Rogge had expected, Malfoy reported Harry and his friends for raising a dragon. Professor McGonagall did not take him seriously. Instead, she docked Slytherin 20 house points for the disturbance. The story, however, snarled into gossip. At breakfast, Malfoy sat at the Slytherin table, visibly nervous. He kept glancing around at the faces turned toward him. Reckless behavior had cost them, and everyone knew it. Rogge, Harry and the others lost points. I made them lose 50 points each, Malfoy blurted out, trying to sound heroic. Eat first, Rogge said flatly, folding his hands. He had warned Malfoy the night before. Eating quietly and sleeping quietly were good habits. Attention and rank among the little wizards depended on attitude as much as power. Malfoy winced at the mention of detention from McGonagall and pushed food around his plate. Rogge set his cutlery down and fixed him with a stare that made the whole table fall silent. Malfoy, I reminded you last night, Rogge said. I know. But Gryffindor, Malfoy protested, trying to justify himself. They've already dropped to last place. And then, Rogge's tone was calm, almost surgical. People say you act without thinking, violating curfew, running to a professor with half a story. The words colored Malfoy's face red. I didn't, Malfoy snapped, standing up. He pointed at Harry. Harry was bringing a dragon into school. I heard it outside Hagrid's hut. A dragon? Cool. Harry, you have a dragon? Can it breathe fire? The Weasley twins cheered, thrilled rather than alarmed, oblivious to the possible trouble. Isn't raising a dragon illegal? Someone asked. Yeah, the Ministry forbids dragon eggs from circulating. Where did Harry even get it? Could it be Hagrid's? Murmurs followed. Malfoy's accusation fed a dozen more questions. All eyes turned to Harry, sighing at the typical Gryffindor recklessness. So do you have proof? Rogge asked. Malfoy hesitated, then blurted, trying to sound certain. I saw it. I heard it. It's called Norbert. Rogge's gaze chilled. Malfoy closed his mouth, realizing too late he had overreached. Malfoy, Rogge said quietly. Yes? Malfoy muttered. You should open a newspaper. I've even got a name for you. Hearsay. The great hall burst into laughter. Rogge pressed both palms to the table to quiet them. Malfoy sat down, head bowed, chastened. Since you're so sure a dragon's involved, why not take it to the dean? Rogge asked plainly. Why run straight to Professor McGonagall? Malfoy stammered, then realized the flaw in his plan. If he'd gone to the right authority, the incident might have been handled properly, or, with the wrong person, used for leverage. Instead, Slytherin had lost 20 points thanks to his panic. 20 points, Rogge said. You cost us the most. Maybe we'll lose the House Cup because of this. A murmur went through the room. With the gap between houses, it seemed unlikely, but Rogge's point was made. Careless actions had consequences. What's done is done, Rogge continued, shifting the mood. There are still 8 weeks until finals. I've applied to the dean to form the Ravenclaw Magical Society, and it's been approved. I want to join first, Daphne squealed. She didn't know much about it, but she was the first to volunteer. The others leaned forward, curious. They already had clubs, Gubraythian Fire, Charms Club, and more. What was a Ravenclaw Magical Society for? It will officially start next year. For now, we're in a preparatory phase, Rogge said, smiling at Daphne to calm her. The Ravenclaw Magical Society will explore the deeper mysteries of magic and help members improve their skills. We'll share techniques and discoveries in potions, spells, transfiguration, and beyond. To give them a demonstration, Rogge raised his wand. Expecto Patronum. The silver raven he'd just summoned lifted from the tip of his wand and soared across the great hall, scattering flecks of light like a dream. The students watched, mouths ajar, as the bird made a graceful arc and then hovered above the tables. Rogge, is that your Patronus? Marcus asked in awe. Of course, Rogge said with modesty. To him, a single raven was fitting, but a ward of ravens symbolized the club's name and spirit. Marcus could hardly speak for excitement. Expecto Patronum was not only visibly spectacular, mastering it marked a wizard for a bright future in the ministry. As the silver raven glinted under the hall's enchanted ceiling, Rogge felt the small, steady thrill of having offered Ravenclaw something new to believe in. Chapter 79, Late Confinement. The Magic Club is for communication and learning, to improve everyone's magical proficiency. I won't hide anything, and the club won't restrict membership by house or background, but... Rogge's words tightened the air. Everyone knew it wouldn't be simple. Official members must have full course grades no lower than E from last year, and at least one subject must be O. Of course, if you're truly exceptional in a particular area, the club can make an exception. All E's, the students cried in unison. Impossible. Faces went pale. At Hogwarts, grades ran O, outstanding, E, exceeds expectations, A, acceptable, P, poor, D, dreadful, and T, troll, as Rogge liked to call it. Is that difficult? Rogge asked, genuinely puzzled. If you're not the sharpest, then at least work hard. Oh, Quidditch doesn't count. They all laughed. Everyone knew Rogge wasn't any good on a broom, and neither was Hermione. All who want to join the Ravenclaw Magical Society, work hard, he finished, then gathered his books and left the Great Hall. Slytherin students were the first to react. The Ravenclaw Magical Society was more than a study group. It was an elite circle, a symbol of status. They suddenly became noticeably more diligent, pairing up and heading to the library, engaging in class. Rogge was generous with his help when asked. The older students, unwilling to let their pride go, tried to measure themselves against him. Apart from his remarkable Patronus, what else did he know? Rogge, you do expecto patronum so well. Your defense against the dark arts must be brilliant. Can you share tips? Not caught up to him after class, hopeful. To be good at defense against the dark arts, you must first understand your enemy, not just memorize spells blindly, Rogge said with a smile. Around him, other students from different houses gathered, hopeful and attentive. For example, a troll is very strong but not smart. An acromantula is as intelligent as a wizard and terrified of fire. Against them, transfiguration or incendio will save you. They listened eagerly, admiration shining in many eyes. Spells are secondary, Rogge added. Secondary? The students blinked. What's more important than spells? Reason and conviction. Rogge emphasized those two words and used himself as an example. Once a troll cornered me. I believed I could win, transfigured its club into cotton, and then killed it. He tugged at his robe to display his trophy, a crudely stitched anti-spell vest made from troll hide. If the enemy is too strong, there's no shame in avoiding them for a time. He smiled and went on. Spells and equipment are tools, but the wizard is the foundation. Power becomes greatness because of the wizard, not the spell. For instance, our headmaster, his wisdom is more powerful than his magic. Rogge's words struck a chord. The crowd applauded, grateful and impressed. Wow, Rogge, that was brilliant, Daphne whispered, thinking poorly of Professor Quirrell by comparison. I used to hate all the defense homework, but now I see why it matters, Blaze said, finally understanding the curriculum. Too bad we can't put it into practice right now. The students chattered animatedly while Rogge listened patiently, offering sharp, helpful corrections. Nearby, Ron nudged Harry and motioned at the crowd with distaste. Look at that. Show off. First he did his Patronus in the Great Hall, now he's showing off knowledge. He's surrounded like some sort of Prince of Slytherin. Disgusting. He snorted, jealousy burning on his face. He probably used a love potion, and he's close with Snape too. Bloody little Death Eater. Harry hesitated, unsure how to respond. He noticed students from his own house going to Rogge, which made him uneasy. Neville kept praising him for a potion tip Rogge had given him, a small favor blown up in Ron's mind. Harry looked at Rogge and, involuntarily, thought of Snape's expression. Ron, I get it. Snape likes him a lot. He can't be trusted. If he turns out to be a dark wizard, we'll report him and get him expelled, Ron declared, then stalked away in a huff. In most students' eyes, Rogge, a pure blood, was surprisingly modest and calm, certainly less arrogant than Malfoy. With his near-perfect class performance, only flying gave Madame Hooch cause to complain, and she had already raised the issue with Snape more than once. Perhaps you should teach him Quidditch, Snape had said coldly. Madame Hooch had no choice but to accept that the shadow dementors left in Rogge's mind might make broomsticks impossible for him. Sighing, Snape frowned and slid a letter into a drawer. If not for the headmaster's reminder, he would have forgotten. Rogge's detention from the previous year had never been served. That morning, notes had been placed on the breakfast table for Rogge, Malfoy, Harry, Hermione, and Neville. Ron had escaped. He had been bitten by a dragon and was absent that day. Rogge, how will Filch punish us? Detention, or will he chain us up and whip us? Malfoy fretted. Calm down, Malfoy. Rogge folded his note and smiled. It's just a curfew violation. It won't be anything too terrible. Malfox breathed easier, but kept glancing at Harry and the others, unwilling to come off worse than them. At 11 o'clock at night, they gathered in the entrance hall. Rogge had an undetectable extension pouch the size of a wallet at his waist and an Arcadia amulet around his neck. Under his robe, he wore the troll-hide anti-spell vest as a shirt. The stitching was awful, but it was hidden. Malfoy followed, pale as Filch approached, with a triumphantly grim expression. Harry and his friends arrived shortly after, the oddness of Malfoy's presence almost forgotten until they spotted Rogge. My detention from last year was never carried out, Rogge joked. I thought I'd gotten away with it. All right, follow me. Filch sniffed and, holding a lamp, led them out of the castle, making a show of talking about medieval punishments as if scaring the students would amuse him. Why here? Malfoy hissed when they saw a lit hut up ahead. That's Hagrid's hut, Harry said, excited. Hagrid will. Malfoy's hopes were dashed by Filch. "Don't expect to spend it at the hut," Filch growled. "Your punishment is to go into the Forbidden Forest. Hopefully Hagrid will bring you back in one piece." The Forbidden Forest? Malfoy shivered, but Rogge remained unfazed. Rogge watched Hagrid approach, long strides accompanied by his boarhound Fang. He fixed both Filch and Hagrid with a sharp stare. "Professor," he said coolly, "the headmaster strictly forbade students from entering the Forbidden Forest on the first day of term. Are you defying him by dumping us in the forest to die?" Hagrid's expression hardened. "Slytherins," he muttered, looking at Rogge and Malfoy with disgust. "If it weren't for their mischief, the others might not be punished at all." "Don't change the subject, Hagrid." Rogge's voice was precise. "I've heard there are dangerous magical creatures in that forest. Some aren't supposed to be there. Things brought and bred there on purpose. Spiders with 8 eyes. "Acromantula?" Hermione whispered, face blanching. The acromantula was deadly. Whole wizards had been killed by them before. Rogge smiled reassuringly at Hermione, then focused on Hagrid and Filch. "Whose orders are these? Did you two decide this yourselves?" His wand was already leveled at them, accusatory. Fang growled at the threat, baring his teeth. Hagrid stepped forward, heavy-footed and angry. Filch grabbed at him to hold him back, and the boarhound sent a low, warning sound in Rogge's direction. "Control your dog, Hagrid," Rogge said coldly. "If it can't be controlled, I'll kill it and make a meal of it. Let it learn the wizard is master." "You." Hagrid's face twisted with fury as he advanced, but Filch pulled him back hard. "It's the headmaster's order," Filch hissed. "If you want to stay at Hogwarts, accept your punishment." Malfoy's voice quavered. "Rogge, I can tell my father." At the mention of Acromantula, he took an involuntary step back, his legs trembling. "As Hogwarts students, we naturally obey the headmaster's orders." Rogge waved his hand to cut off Malfoy and motioned for silence. "That said, let me remind you, if any of us are attacked, especially by something that isn't native to the Forbidden Forest." He looked at Hagrid with a blasé half-smile. Hagrid's face, mostly lost in his beard, was red with fury. "I give the Travis family's word that the Ministry of Magic will open a full investigation." "And the House of Malfoy?" Malfoy began. Before he could finish, Neville stepped forward. "I'm with Rogge too." Malfoy shot Neville a glare that said he had no right to butt in, even if he sided with them. Rogge chuckled and shepherded Neville behind him. "Believe me, gentlemen, if something happens none of us want to see, those creatures will be cleared out entirely. Anyone helping them will find themselves in Azkaban." "Then a Dementor's kiss would be perfectly acceptable, wouldn't it?" Rogge added, goading Hagrid. Hagrid's eyes widened in horror and fury. He seemed ready to flatten the small witch or wizard in front of him. Hagrid had promised that the creatures in the forest were gentle. They had promised him they would not hurt wizards. "A Dementor's kiss?" Harry murmured. "What's that?" "Creatures from Azkaban that can suck out a wizard's soul," Hermione answered, staring at Rogge. Her expression hardened at the mention of Dementors. The idea chilled her. Hagrid snorted in disgust. "Slytherin lot, always making threats," he rumbled. "As long as you do what you're told, I promise none of you will be in danger." "Oh, is that so?" Rogge gave a non-committal shrug and slid his wand back into his robe. "Come on, then." Hagrid raised his lamp and led them down a narrow, overgrown path deeper into the forest. "See those silvery streaks? Unicorn blood," he said. "The unicorn in the forest's been hurt. Last Wednesday I found one dead. We need to find the injured one and put it out of its misery." "Hermione, what's a unicorn?" Harry asked automatically as he walked beside Hagrid. "I saw one in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them." "A Class 4 magical creature," Rogge supplied, cutting in brusquely. "Horse-like, with a horn that detoxifies and tail hair used for wands. Mr. Potter, you might try reading up on these things." Harry flushed with embarrassment at the tone. He didn't like Rogge's arrogance, but there was nothing to be gained by arguing. The reason Rogge had been sharp was practical. Just as they entered the forest, he had run a quick simulation in his head, a sequence of likely events he'd prepared for. 1. Hagrid splits the group. Malfoy's team, led by Fang, searches for the unicorn. 2. They run into the centaur Bane, who warns them off and returns them to Hagrid. 3. After Hagrid and Bane talk, the groups are reassigned, and a centaur leads Harry's group to patrol the forest. 4. Harry's group meets Professor Quirrell unexpectedly, and the centaur intervenes in time to drive off whoever wounded the unicorn. Simulation halted. Huh, it changed, Rogge said with a playful smile. The result he'd expected wasn't matching what had been simulated just moments before they left. Intervene in time? Afraid I'd report it to the ministry, perhaps. He moved around, glancing about, crouching occasionally to scrape up the glittering blood into a test tube. He had prepared for tonight's detention and wasn't keen on letting it fizzle. He was looking forward to meeting Professor Quirrell, or Lord Voldemort, and had fingers itching to see what would happen next. He patted the pouch at his waist as if counting possible outcomes. Hagrid warned him, "Little wizard, unicorn blood is dangerous." Dangerous? Magic is dangerous. If you're frightened of danger, why be a wizard? Rogge held the test tube up to the moonlight and frowned. The blood had thickened into a silvery varnish. Too much time had passed. Pure, yes, but useless. He corked it and sighed. Still, anything that could harm a unicorn must be dangerous. We have to catch it. We, Malfoy shrieked. What if that thing finds us? As long as Fang and I are here, nothing in the forest will harm you, Hagrid boomed. He pointed to the silver-streaked ground. Looks like poor thing's been wandering here since last night. We need to split up and search. Rogge, I'm sticking with you. Malfoy grabbed Rogge's arm, blind to Hagrid's protection. Rogge, however, had the groups arranged differently in his head. Since he expected to run into Quirrell, and sooner rather than later, he wanted to be in the same party as Harry. Malfoy, you go with Hagrid, Rogge said. Why? How brave do you think he is? Rogge's gaze flicked to Fang, the great black boarhound, who nosed Hagrid's leg and immediately returned to his master's side. Be polite to Fang. He senses danger. Harry, you'll take Fang. That Slytherin will be with your group. Hagrid clapped Harry on the back hard enough to make him stumble. Don't worry, Harry. You're a brave Gryffindor. Gryffindors don't shy from danger. We won't be bested. Hagrid's thunderous encouragement lit something in Harry. The unease that had nagged him melted away. With Fang at his side, he felt he could find the wounded unicorn. He met Rogge's eyes and braced himself not to be outdone. Follow me, Rogge ordered the others. If you find any tracks, fire green sparks from your wand. If you're in danger, fire red sparks. Master, if a magical creature attacks us, can we kill it? Malfoy asked, voice high with expectation. Absolutely not, Hagrid roared. The creatures in the Forbidden Forest will not harm you. His dislike for the Slytherins flared at Rogge's casual talk of killing. Rogge only raised an eyebrow. So creatures that live outside the forest or non-magical animals are fair game. Then where did the thing that killed the unicorn come from? Hagrid went silent, winded by the implication. Hermione looked back at Rogge with a new worry. Rogge's question had landed. The one who hurt the unicorn had likely been a wizard. Hagrid led them off in another direction, sullen and angry. Harry, already irritated with Rogge more than with Malfoy, didn't speak to him again. Fang padded ahead, Rogge at the rear. They walked for nearly half an hour through the forest's oppressive dark without seeing even a spider. Heh, Rogge muttered inwardly, sneering. Looks like someone cleared the place out. Even so, he felt a prickle of disappointment and a grudging respect for Quirrell's intelligence that had changed the night's prospects.